right. Good evening, all. At this time, we'd like to call to order and call the roll for the VTA Board of Directors meeting of Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. It's called to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Abikoga, Blankley,
Here.
Davis,
Here.
Din,
Here.
Foley,
Here.
Jane,
Here.
Jimenez, Kamei, Lee,
Present.
Lee Ing.
Here.
That member, alternate member Lee Ing is joining us remotely. I'll come back to her. Lopez,
Here.
Mahan. Here. Thank you. Montano. Montano, thank you. Rennie,
Here.
Torres. Thank you. Turner. Chavez. Chairperson Burt.
Here.
And we have Member Jimenez here as well. We have a quorum, Chair. Thank you.
So first, thanks everyone for being here in person. Since we haven't met in person in a while, I'd like to review a few safety items. So if we need to evacuate the room, our assembly area, as noted on the screen, is at the parking lot at the corner of North First in River Oaks, across from Starbucks. And please familiarize yourself with the exit doors. If we have an emergency, we'll be given instructions to help guide responders to our location. And the nearest AED device is in the main lobby by the security guard. Restrooms are located outside to our left and sign down the hall. And then to members of the public, thank you everyone for joining us. I'll be announcing when the board's ready to receive public comment. So in-person attendees who wish to address the board are encouraged to complete a blue speaker card and submit it to our board office staff before the item is heard. And the speaker cards are available at the public information table. So, and then virtual attendees can use the raise hand function in Zoom or press *9 if you're dialing in on your phone. And then we'll be inviting those who attended in person to speak first. After that, we'll invite those who raise their hand on Zoom to make their comments. So to my colleagues, thanks again for everybody being here, and we get to see each other physically in person. Please keep your mics muted unless you're ready to speak. And for those who are attending in person, please remember to mute your mobile devices or laptops. And if colleagues, if you wish to speak, please flag my attention to by raising your hand and wave it widely if I miss you. And we'll be doing a voice vote for action items unless there's a need to do a roll call vote. So on that note, we can commence. And the first item is an order of the day. As noted on our revised agenda, item 7.1, the BART OCC agreement, is now an information item. And staff is requesting to remove the property ID number B4201 owned by Altavon Enterprises 1 LLC to remove that from item 4.1, resolutions of necessity. And then that is because an agreement has been reached with the property owner. And are there any other agenda changes by colleagues? Okay. And any other changes by staff? None? No. Thank you. So at this time, we'll take a motion and a second to approve the orders of the day.
So moved.
Thank you. Moved by Vice Chair Chavez, second by Member Dean. Would the clerk please call the roll? Or do I just say all in favor? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Done quickly, thank you. And item 2 is awards and commendations. We don't have any today, so we'll move on to item 3, which is public comment, which is the portion of the meeting reserved for persons who wish to speak to the board on any item within the board's jurisdiction that is not on the agenda. And speakers will have up to 1 minute to speak. And we have on the agenda up to 30 minutes for this item. And if we should run over, then we will schedule that at the end of the meeting under other items. The law doesn't permit the board to take any action or have extended discussion on any item that's not on the agenda, except under certain special circumstances. And then anyone who wishes to speak with needing special customer services, they're encouraged to, or excuse me, those who are speaking about customer service items of VTA service are encouraged to contact the customer service department after you make your comments. And the contact information for the customer service department is on the screen. And I'd like to remind members of the public that those who are speaking should adhere to our rules when addressing the board. They are on the public speaker timer slide, so you can see it on the screen. And if you want to address the board on matters not on the agenda, please submit a request to speak at this time. And we'll now hear from the public. Do we have any members present and then remotely?
We do not have any requests to speak at the in-person location, but we have one hand raised from a member of the public through Zoom. Anne Marie, please accept the unmute and begin speaking when you're ready.
Good evening, Board. This is Anne Marie Ruiz, Operations Safety Steward, Shibuya Division.
You're welcome to speak.
Hello? Can I be heard?
Anne Marie?
Yes.
I think she's trying to speak, but we're not getting the audio. We will come back to you, Anne. Hang
One
on.
moment, please, Anne.
Okay, I don't know what's happening.
Just a moment, please. We have some audio problem at the moment. Just a moment.
Okay.
Chair, if it's okay, we'll come back to the public speaker while we try to fix the technical issue.
Okay.
Thank
so
you.
Then we'll go ahead and move on to item 4.1 and we'll try to give the member of the public a future chance to speak. And item 4.1 is a hearing of intention to adopt resolutions of necessity. So we are conducting a hearing and adopting resolutions of necessity for 4 VTA's BART Silicon Valley Phase 2 projects. The full staff report is noted on the screen. As a reminder, property B4201, owned by the Alvaton Enterprises, has been removed from the agenda. Ron Gullum, Director of Real Estate and Transit-Oriented Development, will present this item. Ron will provide a presentation for each property, and then I'll open the hearing for each property. Property owners or their representatives will be given up to 5 minutes to speak, and members of the public who would like to address the board on the resolutions of necessity will be given 1 minute to speak after the staff presentation for all properties are done. So Ron, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where it says push. Thank you. So if I could have the next slide, please. Just to provide some background before I get into the individual properties, I'd like to note that the full administrative record for this hearing is in the board packet. My presentation is a highlight of certain key points. I also want to let the board know that you do have communications from a property owner in the board packet as well. Just to provide some background on the property acquisition for the project, what you see on the screen is, of course, the BART Phase 2 extension, including the 5-mile tunnel extension that's part of BART Phase 2. This work on property acquisition dates back to the environmental document. When the draft environmental analysis was released, all properties that were potentially identified as needed for the project, those owners were notified and had an opportunity to comment. Subsequent to the board's adoption of the environmental clearance and the record of decision, the design work proceeded to identify specific property interests that are required. For each property owner, once we've defined the property interest that's required, we provide them a notice of our decision to appraise, and we ask to meet with them and our appraiser so we can jointly inspect the property as a beginning point in the appraisal. We conduct the appraisal. Once we finish the appraisal, there is also a review appraiser, a second review that is done. If the dollar value is above the limits required by the Federal Transit Administration, they also conduct a review. And the framework for making offers is that we have to establish just compensation. And just compensation is defined as fair market value. In other words, by law, we have to make all offers at fair market value. When we make an offer to an owner, we also notify them that we are obliged to pay $5,000 for an appraisal if they wish to have their own appraisal conducted. Once we do that, we seek to allow 90 days for negotiations with the owner. During that time, if we cannot reach agreement on compensation, we ask them to sign a possession and use agreement. And what the possession and use agreement does is it gives possession of the property for the project, but it gives us more time to continue negotiating on valuation. Now, in the event we cannot reach agreement, or we cannot convince the owner to enter into a possession and use agreement, we need to proceed with the resolution of necessity hearing in order to maintain the project schedule. I just want to highlight that even after a resolution of necessity hearing, we do continue to negotiate with the owner to see if they'll sign a possession use agreement. And in general, throughout this process, even once we begin eminent domain, we do very much seek to continue to negotiate with properties. Litigation is absolutely our last resort in this, and we have a very good track record of being able to negotiate resolution at various points in time. Next slide, please. For tonight's hearing, I would just like to highlight the specific 4 findings that is required for the board to make to adopt a resolution of necessity. The first is that public interest and necessity require the project. The second is that the project is planned or located to be most compatible with the greatest public good and least private injury. The property in the resolution is necessary for the project, and an offer of just compensation has been made. And I would like to add, because this is often the case, that compensation is not a subject for the resolution necessity hearing. So to the extent that owners do not agree with the value of our offer or think it's worth a different price, that is not a subject for the hearing. Next slide, please. All of the hearings we're doing tonight are for tunnel easements for BART Phase 2. And on the map, you see the location. B4201 is the one where a possession use agreement was signed, and so we are not doing that hearing. On the right is a simplified graphic that shows how the tunnel easements work. And just to provide a very high-level overview, basically from the ground level to the top of the tunnel is about 65 to 70 feet, depending where you are. 65 to 70 feet is about the height of a 6-story building. In general, particularly for residential properties, the tunnel and the tunnel easement that's in the packet does not impact folks' ability to use their house. So for example, if they want to build an addition, if they want to add a floor to their house, if they want 2 floors to their house, if they want to build an ADU, whatever it is, that does not require further approval. Where you potentially get into situations where the restrictions that are spelled in the tunnel easement raise an issue is if you're looking to do a multifamily project, say a larger apartment building that might be 4 or 5 stories or taller. And I do want to emphasize that in terms of the restrictions that are in there, it's an important distinction because, again, for most folks that are residential owners, there's not an impact on their ability to use the property. With that, if I could have the next slide, please. So the first property, which is our parcel B3038, is Lenzen Park. This is the city park that's located at Lenzen Avenue in Stockton in San Jose. The park in total is just over 20,000 square feet. We require a little over 8,600 square feet for tunnel easement. We had made an offer to the city on December 7th, 2022. Next slide, please. And the graphic shows you both the location of the tunnel easement in the park as well as the location of the easement for the project. This is a little bit of an unusual situation. It's what we call a friendly condemnation. And what I mean by friendly condemnation is that in working with the city staff, they identified that the city charter requires a vote to make changes in park property. And so in working with the city attorney and city staff, they identified that rather than having to go to a vote of the people to get this tunnel easement, if the VTA board were to adopt a resolution of necessity, at that point, city staff would be authorized to negotiate with VTA staff. So if the board does approve this resolution of necessity, we will not go further in the eminent domain process. We will negotiate with city staff, as we have on several other properties we've already purchased from the city of San Jose for this project. The final comment I'll make is that the tunnel easement will have no impact on the use of the park or any impact on park operations. Again, this is for a tunnel that is basically 65 or 70 feet below the surface. That concludes my presentation on this parcel.
Thank you. So I'll now open the public hearing for property B3038, owned by the city of San Jose. And does the city wish to address the board at this time? City or any other reps? Yes. Okay. And so we see no comments. Any questions from our colleagues? All right. Then in that note, we can continue to the next property. Ron?
Thank you. Next slide, please. This next property, which is our parcel B3121 at 1255 East Santa Clara Street in San Jose. It's at AE San Jose Property LLC is the owner. This is at Santa Clara and 26th Street. The current improvements are a retail space. The total property is about 10,400 square feet, and we require a little over 3,400 square feet for a tunnel easement. We had made an offer on July 25th for the tunnel easement. If I could have the next slide, please. The graphic shows the location of the tunnel easement under the property and its location along the alignment. This is a situation where we had actually made an offer to the prior owner, Ms. Caudillo. She was in the process of selling the property and asked us to hold off on our acquisition until sale could be completed. The AE entity that I mentioned is the new purchaser of the property. We understand that they are in the process of getting an improvement for tenant improvements for changes they're making in the building. The tenant improvements they wish to make do not affect the tunnel easement in any way. But we have been told by them that they want to wait until they finish the tenant improvement permitting process with the city before working with us on a tunnel easement. Based on the project schedule and our need to process a wide range of property acquisitions, there is not a need to make these separate items. We've asked them to sign a possession use agreement and they have not agreed. And for that reason, we are asking the board to approve a resolution of necessity. And that concludes my presentation on this parcel.
Thank you. So now we are formally opening the hearing for property B3121, owned by AE San Jose Property LLC. And the owners or their representatives are welcome to address the board at this time.
We do not have a request to speak from the in-person location, and we do not have any hands raised, Chair.
Thank you. And are there any members of the public who want to speak on this?
We do not have any hands raised,
Thank you.
Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions from colleagues? Yes. Member Abe Koga and Member Jimenez as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. For the B3121 property, you mentioned tenant improvements. Will that potentially increase the assessed value of the properties? Or the property?
Okay. No, it would not. Basically, the valuation set as of the date that we made the offer. The appraisal is based on highest and best use, and the highest and best use is the current building. So the improvements they're envisioning will not increase the value or entitle them to further compensation.
Member Jimenez.
That answered my question.
Thank you. All right. So on that note, we can move on to the next item. Ron?
Great, thank you. The next property is our parcel B3304 at 204 North Morrison Avenue. The owners are Brianna Brown and Monique Brown as co-trustees of the Michelle F. Brown 2014 Revocable Living Trust. The property is currently in use as a group residential facility. The property in total is about 9,859 square feet, and we're seeking just over 5,000 square feet for a tunnel easement. We had made an offer on October 4th, 2022 for the offer for the tunnel easement. If I could have the next slide, please. You do have in the packet a communication from counsel for the owner. I will say that the point of disagreement has to do with compensation, and although it's not a subject for the hearing, I'll just note that it really is about kind of differing assessments of the probability of rezoning and what that rezoning might be and how that might affect future property value. We've asked them to sign a possession use agreement, and they have not agreed to do that. So in order to maintain the project schedule and our property acquisition, we're asking the board to adopt a resolution of necessity. And that concludes my presentation on this parcel.
We'll formally open the hearing on property B3304, owned by Brianna Brown and Monique Brown, co-trustees of the Michelle F. Brown 2014 Revocable Living Trust. And did the owners wish to speak on this item?
We do not have any request to speak from the in-person location, and I do not see any hands raised in Zoom.
All right. Any questions from colleagues? Okay, and then on that note, we move on to the next item.
Great, and our final hearing tonight is for our parcel B4065 at 157 Rose Court. The owners are Brendan and Mystique Smith-Bentley, trustees of the Smith-Bentley Family Trust. The current use is a single-family residence. The total property is 5773 square feet, and we're seeking to acquire a 4,179 square foot tunnel easement. We made an offer on September 9th, 2022 for that tunnel easement. So I have the next slide, please. This shows location of the tunnel easement and its location along the alignment. Our discussions with the owner first touched on concerns that have been raised by other parties as well about potential noise and vibration. And what we shared with them is the work that was done at the time that the environmental document was adopted, which is the document does have mitigations for noise and vibration. Noise and vibration will be below the VTA levels that are required. They are basically at or below the limits of human perception. And so generally when we've had discussions with most folks, they understand this, and that addresses a lot of their concerns. There's also a disagreement on compensation, similar to what I mentioned before. It's really about probability of rezoning and what that future value might be, depending on what the rezoning might be. We had asked them to sign a possession use agreement. They declined to do that. So in order to maintain the project schedule, we're asking the board to adopt a resolution of necessity. And that concludes my presentation on this property.
Thank you. And did the owners wish to speak? Oh, I should say, excuse me. The public hearing is formally open on B4065, owned by Brendan Smith-Bentley and Mystique Smith-Bentley, trustees, the Smith-Bentley Family Trust. And do the owners wish to speak?
We do not have any request to speak at the in-person location, and Chair, I do not see any hands raised on Zoom.
Thank you. And any questions from colleagues? Okay, so now we'll go back to the public, whether there are any members of the public who wish to speak on any of these properties.
There are no hands raised and no request to speak at the in-person location.
Great. And I think our legal counsel, Evelyn Tran, had a comment to make.
So this is really for the board members who are
Please.
from. Hi.
Sit on.
Thank you. This is for the board members who also sit on the City of San Jose City Council. There is one parcel that is owned by the City of San Jose. Under the government code, there is an exception in regard to conflicts of interest that would allow you to vote on the particular item so long as how you're compensated from the cities, you get your stipend, you get your per diem from the City of San Jose, and if you can just state for the record that it is based on Government Code 1091.5A9, thank you, that you have a non-interest in this particular action, and you may then vote on that item. Thank you.
So they would need to individually state that, or?
They would
Okay.
need to note it for the record, yes. Thank you.
And Member Dean?
Thank you. Would this be the time if I wanted to ask a question related to the item as a whole, but not specific to one of the properties mentioned?
That'd be fine.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that staff was able to reach an agreement on the property owned by Altavon. Is staff able to give any more details right now as to how that was reached and any details about the agreement?
What the Altavon signed is our standard possession use agreement. And so in a nutshell, I'll summarize the agreement as saying that for the purposes of our construction, which in the case of tunnel easement, is the ability of the tunnel boring machine to go underneath the property, we now have the legal right to go ahead and do that work. It does not settle compensation. So what it says is that we will negotiate for 6 months on compensation. Now, at the end of that time, if we can't reach agreement, we're willing to continue negotiation, but we have the time limit because what we're also saying for the property owners is that if you don't feel you can reach agreement with VTA, you still retain your ultimate right, which is to have a jury settle the amount of the compensation.
Okay, thank you.
So should we go down the line to the San Jose members and let them?
And can Evelyn repeat the government code again?
Yeah.
But Evelyn, do it really fast.
It's Government Code Section 1091.5A9. Thank you.
Why don't we go this way? I'm sorry.
Aisha, can I ask a quick question? Because I've been talking with city staff behind the scenes a little bit about it this week. This past week, I just started a new job at the city of San Jose. Do I also need to recuse myself under the same?
It's a little different if you're employed. If the action would impact your own financial interests, so if you personally say your department is going to get some particular benefit out of that contract, then yes, you would have to recuse yourself, and it would be considered a remote interest that would allow the rest of the board to vote, but you would have to recuse yourself. So which department?
City council. So working for the council.
Oh, for the council, then you would be fine, but I would also say you should make the announcement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we'll start with Member Torres. Did you want to? But that's what I'm meaning is to go through the just down the line the statements of why you do not need to recuse yourself. That formal comment.
How do we have to say it again? Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Evan. Give us the script.
Yeah.
I can start on this side if you like.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Well, we'll start
And I'm
with
not
the-
sure I'm going to say it
the
correctly, but I'll
experienced
start.
The more
guy.
veteran
Yeah.
So,
from the city council.
So, as a city council member of the city of San Jose, per government code 1091.5A9, I don't have an interest in this property and therefore am allowed to vote.
Thank you.
Good job.
Member Mahan.
Member of the San Jose City Council per Government Code 1091.5A9. I do not have a financial interest in the property and therefore will not recuse myself from the vote.
Thank you. Member Foley.
As a provision of Government Code Section 1091.5A9, I do not have a financial interest in the property, and I do not need to recuse myself.
Thank you. Member Davis.
As a member of the San Jose City Council, under Government Code Section 1091.5A9, I don't have a financial interest in this property and therefore am allowed to vote on this item.
And Member Din.
Thank you. Not as a member of the city council, but as a staff member for the city of San Jose, per Government Code 1091.5A9, I don't have interest in the property and will not be recusing myself from the vote.
Thank you. And Member Torres.
As a member of the San Jose City Council, Government Section 1091.5A9, I do not have financial and interest in the property, and therefore I do not have to recuse myself for the vote.
Thank you. So at this time, we'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion to adopt the 4 resolutions of necessity, and the maker of the motion should state the property ID numbers.
I can move that.
Please do.
I make said motion for properties B3304, B3038, B3121, and I believe, is that all of them, or am I missing one?
B 4065.
4065,
I heard so many things at once. Can you give it-
4065.
4065. Oh, B4065, thank you.
Great, and we have a second?
Second.
Where'd that come from? I'm sorry.
Pam.
Member Foley. All right. So would the clerk please call the roll?
We could just call
Okay.
for the vote.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously.
Great, thank you.
We're now on to item number 5, which is reports, and we'll go into 5.1, which are committee reports, and we'll be taking public comments for items under this section at the conclusion of all the reports. The first one is 5.1A, which is the Citizens Advisory Committee, or the CAC Chairperson's Report. And we have Howard Miller, the chairperson of the CAC, who will provide a report, I believe. Okay, is he remote?
He's remote.
Great.
Hang on, Chair Miller, we're trying to see if we can hear you.
All right, can you hear me?
CAC Chair Miller, we're trying to call you on your cell phone because we can't hear you in this room. If you can please answer the call so we can put you on speaker.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Give me 1 second. Okay, you're on speaker now.
All right, excellent. And I will begin. Good evening, Chairperson Burt, Vice Chair Chavez, General Manager, and the Board of Directors. The Citizens Advisory Committee and the Measure 2000A Watchdog Committee met on February 8th. It was a hybrid meeting, but we did get to meet there in River Oaks. It was good to be back in person. We will be 100% next month, which is for us next week. Next week. So in our regular meeting, we did get a very comprehensive report from the High Speed Rail Authority to understand what was going on, as there is a nexus with some of the high-speed rail projects and Measure A funding. It was an excellent and thorough presentation. And all I can say is like everybody, we're probably disappointed that it's going to take so long to get service up and running, but we're happy to hear about the plans and see that we are making progress. The other major item on our agenda was the Better Bus Stops program, and staff did an excellent job, very comprehensive job in explaining how the program works and showed us many examples of before and after photos, which jogged a lot of discussion about how do bus stops get targeted to be updated. Staff was very thorough and comprehensive in their explanations, and the committee greatly appreciated that report. Our next meeting is, as I noted, next week on Wednesday, March 8th, 4 o'clock, and it will be right there in the River Oaks room, right where you guys are right now. I'm available if you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Howard. Anyone have any questions? Great. Well, thank you for that update, and that concludes the CAC. So now we'll move on to the Policy Advisory Committee, and I'm seeing that we have the report available in our packet, and I believe we don't have an oral report tonight. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you. All right, so unless there are any questions on the written report, and I see none, we can then move on to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee Chairperson's Report, which is also in our packet. Then lastly, we have the standing committee chairpersons report, the Administrative and Finance Committee and the Safety and Security and Transit Planning and Operations Committee chairpersons' reports are online in the packet. And so we'll now take public comment for all items under the committee reports. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on the committee reports?
We have two hands raised. Unfortunately, we can't hear them in this room, but the folks who are joining us remotely can hear them. So at this time, I'll just call Anne Marie Ruiz. And for the members here in B106, I'll make sure to send you the audio recording of the comments of the members of the public by email tomorrow. And I apologize for the technical difficulties. Anne Marie, please accept the unmute and begin speaking when you're ready. We will we will come back to you, Anne Marie.
Okay,
And
when?
clerk, do we want to allow the members to phone in to do as, or is that possible?
Just did on a cell phone.
We will have feedback in the room.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's our challenge.
She's asking to call my cell.
No, yeah, I was gonna give her cell.
You're gonna say it out loud.
Yeah. For the Anne Marie, if you want to dial my phone number is 408-464-7740. And that's for you too, Eugene, so that we can hear you as you speak.
Can you repeat that, please?
Elaine, can you repeat, please, the number? Elaine, can you hear me? Elaine? We're having also
Again, for Anne Marie, my number is 408-464-7740.
7740. Okay, thank you so much. I will call in. I will call you. This is Elaine's phone number, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Elaine? We're having also.
Great.
All right, let's try Eugene. Eugene, please give me a call.
Yes, Eugene Bradley, Silicon Valley Transit users. Could you repeat the phone number again?
Oh, he's speaking.
408.
Okay. Eugene, just keep on speaking so that the tech guys can call. All right.
I
Eugene,
see.
I'll put you on speaker.
Right.
Oh, this is Anne Marie?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience. Hang on. I will put you on right now. Hang on.
All right. Let me know when I can speak, please.
All right. Can Eugene?
Eugene,
for
just a
minute?
moment,
Thank you.
please.
All right, this is Anne Marie. Anne Marie, please begin speaking.
Hello, I'm sorry, board. This is Anne Marie Ruiz, Operations Safety Steward at Shibuya. I wanted to bring up the Santa Teresa Light Rail Station that is currently being prepared for the homeless safe place parking. And while I think it's awesome that we're doing this as a company, I think that we have forgotten about the safety of the operators. There is a break room there that actually last week, there was a homeless person sleeping in front of the door going into the break room. So it would be a very easy fix. I put in paperwork and I haven't heard back from anybody as yet. But while we're doing housing for the homeless, it would be nice if we also thought about our employees that are sleeping in their cars and who have also lost the parking for their motorhomes or campers at Cerrone. Some of our people are driving 2 hours one way to come to work and then drive another 8 to 10 hours and then 2 hours home.
And this is Elaine again. Your time is up. So
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye. Okay, for Eugene Bradley, again, the number to call is 408-464-7740.
Eugene, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. The number to call is 408
408
464
464.
7740.
Rainey, Eugene, actually, I'm going to put you on. I can do it right now. Just give me 1 second. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm ready when you're ready.
Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, Eugene, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Eugene Bradley, Silicon Valley Transit users. I was gonna follow up by email on Monday regarding the comments I made at the prior SSTP&O meeting, in particular the Better Bus Stops program. I worked with Christina Fitzgerald on this issue, and one of the issues that she would like to see, I remember her mentioning, is that she would like to see technology that has a beacon so that the visually impaired can easily find a bus stop. Also, from what I've seen with the Better Bus Stops program, the bus stops that have maps in the shelters, from what I can see, they need to have like a "you are here" dot that indicates where that person is within the county. Too often with the bus stops with the maps in them now, there is no place about where that person is in the county. So as a person looks at the map, they can't find where they're at in the county and they end up needlessly lost. So I'll follow up on this more on Monday. This is something for SSTPO and VTA to consider improvements for the bus stops. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you. So the public comment for 5.1 is now closed, and we'll move on to 5.2, which is the general manager report. Just a reminder, we'll take public comment at the conclusion of all the items under the GM report. So Carolyn, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chair and members of the board. I'm pleased on the first slide to report that the Social Security Administration has officially extended Social Security coverage retroactive to 1973. As background, VTA employees are covered by either a CalPERS pension plan or the VTA ATU pension plan. For VTA employees to receive Social Security benefits in addition to their pension, VTA needs to have what is called a Section 218 agreement with the Social Security Administration. It was discovered that VTA never had one in place, even though VTA had been paying Social Security taxes and the Social Security Administration had been paying benefits to VTA retirees. However, since VTA did not have a Section 218 agreement in place, the Social Security Administration could choose at any time to stop paying benefits to retirees. For current employees, the Social Security Administration could choose, I already just said that, could eliminate or significantly reduce the estimated future benefits. To fix this problem, VTA held referendum votes in March 2021 whereby a majority of the employees needed to select Social Security benefits. The referendums passed, and the results of the vote, along with the necessary paperwork, were submitted to the administration, which signed the agreement this past December in 2022. I want to actually thank, and I know Evelyn does as well, thanks to everyone involved in the process, including 2020 Board Chair Cindy Chavez, 2021 Board Chair Glenn Hendricks, and former board member Howard Miller, the union leadership, and VTA staff and management. And I want to give a thanks to Evelyn Trent as well. So this is very good news for our employees in our agency. Next slide is our bus operator graduation, where we graduated 17 new bus operators this month. They are all now serving our riders full-time. The graduation ceremony took place on February 8th at our Shibuya yard, and a couple of our new drivers are returning to VTA after having left for other jobs. And we also have one driver who was formerly a transit driver from Texas. I would encourage any of our board members to attend if they're interested, which happens about every other month. We can get you that information. The board secretary can give you that information as well. And it does provide an interesting perspective on what these drivers go through to prepare for their jobs. Next slide is the VTA trading cards. We have a fun collectible that we introduced to the public this month. The VTA trading cards are available to our passengers and the public in general. They're free cards featuring pictures of our trains and buses, and on the back of each card is a fun fact about public transit and useful contact information for VTA, including our website and our customer service phone number. Right now, selected bus and train operators have volunteered to make the cards available to their passengers, and they'll be available at our customer service centers. Any operator who would like to have these, to give these to the passengers, can request them, and all of our board members should have received a copy of the first 2 cards in the collection. And if you'd like more for your constituents, please let us know. Each month, we will introduce 2 new cards for a total of 10 in the collection, and you can read more about the cards on our blog at vta.org, but I just want to note that the artwork is actually done by a photographer, but who's also a bus operator for us, Dan Quinones, I think. I forget how he say his last name. I'm sorry. Quintano, that's right, Danny Quintano. We're very proud of that work that he's done. We've actually bought a few pieces of his work, and he has agreed with an agreement with us for us to be able to publish this on the trading card. So we really thank him quite a bit. The next is Driver Appreciation Day. Saturday, March 18th is Transit Driver Appreciation Day, and our communications team is planning multiple activities to help the rest of our employees and our passengers show our drivers they are appreciated for the critical service they provide our community. We don't really want to give away some of the planned activities, but I will have a follow-up at our April board meeting. But if you do see our drivers that day, make sure you show them extra love. So, thanks. The next item is what our marketing and communication outreach activities where we're out in the field. The first one is our Winchester Station Transit-Oriented Development. We have a meeting scheduled for February 16th on that for information for the community in that area. That does also get to meet the developer, Related California, and Path Ventures. Actually, the meeting was already attended by 30 community members, along with VTA County and City of Campbell staff and the developer. The next I want to talk about is the Senior Mobility Program, which is what we call travel training. The ridership in the senior community has been increasing, and with that, our Senior Mobility Program Manager is busy out and about the community. In addition to participating in county and city senior agenda meetings this past month, travel training is on the rise. A sold-out Train the Trainer Academy was held on February 28th, and spots for the next one in April are filling up fast. And for this month, our community outreach team will be hosting an event on March 22nd to discuss all things about light rail. This is one of those Ask VTA, and this one will have facilitated question and answer session that allows our community members to ask questions on VTA subject matter experts and gain a deeper understanding of VTA's program and goals. We are promoting this on social media and on our blog, and the community can RSVP through Eventbrite. And there is a ridership report and a safety report in your packet. And I am now going to turn it over to Jim Lawson for the Government Affairs update. He will introduce our speakers for the federal lobbyist updates. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Carolyn, and good evening, Chair, members of the Board of Directors. It says it's on. Yeah, you got to get really close to this one. As the General Manager mentioned, there's a written report on government affairs in your packet. I did want to highlight that it mentions the joint meeting between the Senate and Assembly Transportation Committees on Monday, at which transit operators, along with the California Transit Association and others, pitched the idea that transit needs more funding to continue with our efforts. The state budget is certainly not as robust as anybody would hope, but we still heard from the members of the legislature that they want to try to find ways to assist us. I want to let you know that the California Transit Association is working very diligently to try to craft a statewide ask for transit support from the legislature, and I will be in Sacramento tomorrow working on that particular issue with them. Right now, it's my pleasure to introduce our federal lobbyists. They come to us from Washington, D.C., where they're based, and this is an opportunity for us to see them in person. And I admit that I hadn't seen Steve in 3 years. Ukwe is the first person that I have met since the pandemic in person before I saw them on a screen, which is really remarkable. So Steve Palmer, representing Van Scoyoc Associates, has been with us for many years. And Ukhu Mahar Persma is with Cardinal Infrastructure and has recently joined that firm. They're here to give you a brief update on the view from Washington, D.C. Steve?
Thank you, Jim. And is it on?
Yeah, you got it.
There we go. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jim. Chair and members of the board, it's a pleasure to be here today. Can we have the next slide, please? What we'd like to do is introduce ourselves first a little more than Jim did, and then kind of set the stage for what we're working with in this Congress, in this environment, and then talk a little bit more specifically about the programs that we're working on behalf of VTA in Congress and the FTA and DOT. As Jim said, I've worked with VTA for a number of years. I started in 2010 as the federal advocate. I've been doing this kind of work for 23 years now. Before that, I was with the Clinton administration. I was Assistant Secretary for Government Affairs, where I handled all the congressional and intergovernmental affairs for the Secretary and the administration on transportation issues. And I spent 11 years on Capitol Hill handling transportation issues there.
And I'm Alka Maher Piersma. I've been a Cardinal Infrastructure for all 3 weeks now. I just actually left the U.S. House. I was there for 23 years, the last 8 years on Transportation Infrastructure Committee. On that committee, I was the staff director for the Railroad Subcommittee for 3 years and the deputy staff director for the Highways and Transit Subcommittee for 5 years.
Next slide, please. So I will lead off and talk about, like I said, the environment which we're dealing with. Some of this you are very well aware of. I don't want to go into a lot of detail. First, I'm going to talk about the House, what's happened there. Essentially, we know the Republicans gained control of the House. They didn't do as well as many expected. The majority they picked up 12 seats. The majority that they're working with now is essentially the same as Speaker Pelosi had in the last Congress. It's 9 seats. It's changed slightly since I did the slide earlier. That doesn't mean there are aren't a lot of new members that we need to educate. Not all of them, but a number of them on the 2 transportation committees and funding committees, which I'll talk about momentarily. And so, next slide, please. The Senate, a little bit more the same. Again, the expectation is that the Republicans would take control. It was probably maybe 50-50, but the party in power, I should have said on the House, the party in power typically loses 26 seats. So the fact that there was a change of 12 was a little bit of a surprise, and even more of a surprise in the Senate, where typically there's a 4-seat swing. The fact that the Democrats picked up 1 in Pennsylvania, flipped that seat over, was a little bit of a surprise. 5 new Republican and 2 new Democratic senators, but again, as you'll see as I talk about the next couple slides, the leadership in the Senate on the committees that we care about is going to be largely the same. Next slide, please. First, the House. A lot of new faces that we're going to be dealing with in terms of the chair and the ranking Democrats, the ranking minority member on these committees. Transportation and Infrastructure is the committee that Alka worked on for many years, he mentioned, is the committee that sets the policies and outlines the programs, authorizes program funding for highways, transit, rail, aviation. Their big issue this year is going to be the FAA reauthorization bill. It's another 5-year bill. They are focused solely on that right now. So, we send off weekly reports to the staff on what's happening in Congress, and there's not a lot that's been happening so far on public transportation issues, quite honestly. Sam Graves, pilot, general aviation pilot, is the new chair from Kansas City, Missouri, in the rural part of the state. Ranking member is Rick Larson, who effectively replaces Peter DeFazio, a name we have heard much about over the last several years, who was the chair, and now Rick Larson from Everett, Washington, is the ranking Democrat. Both have been in the Congress since about 2001, 2003. And the Appropriations Committee is going to be really where we're going to focus a lot of our attention, as we have been, but more so now because the infrastructure bill is in place. We need to secure the funding for the BART project. And that is the chair of I should say first, DOT is combined in the same bill with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So when they look at, when we look at the committees that we have to deal, subcommittees on appropriations we have to deal with, how convince them essentially that public transit is more important than other transportation programs and housing programs. And that can be a real challenge, as you all know, from being in this part of California. Tom Cole from Oklahoma is the new chair, part of the leadership in the House. So I would call him more of a moderate in this environment than a conservative. I would put him in that further to the right years ago when he first came to Congress. But as the Congress has gotten more conservative, he finds himself more in the middle. And the new ranking Democrat is Mike Quigley from Chicago. The good news is Congressman Cole is very strongly supportive of transportation. Mike Quigley is very strongly supportive of transit because of the Chicago Transit Authority. So even though there aren't many projects in Oklahoma, he knows the value of it throughout the country to these kinds of capital investment grant projects. Next slide, please. I won't go into all the detail. The committees, as I said earlier, is largely the same, the leadership. The two committees that we have to deal with the most are again, the counterpart to the T&I committee, the Transportation and Infrastructure, it's a little more, jurisdiction is a little more diffused. In the Senate on transit, it's banking, housing, and urban affairs. Sherrod Brown from Ohio cares a lot about Cleveland and a number of other cities in his state. Tim Scott is new, rural state. South Carolina doesn't have a lot large transit projects. The Appropriations Committee, Brian Schatz, has worked very hard to make sure the Honolulu subway system gets funded. So he's an advocate for public transit, and we'll be dealing with a new ranking member in Cindy Hyde-Smith from Mississippi. Next slide, please. So with all of that, where are we? What are we dealing with in this environment? It's a divided government. We've had this before. The Congress is much more partisan than it used to be. That's not to say nothing will get done, but it is going to be a challenge. You've probably heard about how the Republicans, knowing that the federal debt limit is going to be reached in either the second or third quarter. Well, actually, we've already reached it, but we're going to run out of options to offset, to keep the government funded. That will run out sometime in the second or third quarter. That needs to be raised, or the loans that the government has issued will default. The Republicans view this as a target, House Republicans particularly, as a target to cut spending. Now, initially, there was talk about cutting Medicare and Social Security. That seems to be off the table. The real focus now is if they can find some way, either, again, like they did with President Obama, cap spending, if you remember budget sequestration, how much fun that was, either cap spending or possibly reduce spending. Now, they don't want to cut defense, so if we look at the possibility of across-the-board cuts for non-defense programs, transportation included in that could see an 18% cut. If they want to freeze spending at last year at 2022 levels, it's a significant reduction because of all the additional spending that happened over the last several years. So there's a lot of pressure in this year's annual appropriations bill to try to ensure that they don't cut spending. I'll just talk louder. Don't cut spending in public transit. My green light is still on, so. Okay. Pardon me. Thank you. And there aren't a lot of places to cut spending in the transportation bill. It's a very large bill. It's close to $100 billion, but it's really the FAA, which are not going to cut. It's Amtrak, and it's the Capital Investment Grant Program. So we've got our work cut out for us to make sure that that funding is preserved. The infrastructure bill, or the bipartisan infrastructure law, whatever you want to call it, is pretty safe because there's not going to be an effort. The president won't allow that to be cut. He will veto any legislation that tries to cut that. So that's the good situation. But again, it's a very steep hill to try to see that the increases that the FDA needs for the Capital Investment Grant Program are going to be funded. Real quickly, earmarks are going to be continued. They brought them back 2 years ago. They're very small. They've ranged, we were successful in securing 2 earmarks for $2 million each. The House Republicans are going to continue to earmark bills, but they're going to cut it in half, the amount of money they're setting aside for earmarks. So it's going to be a challenge there, too. As Alka and I were talking earlier, you really need we need to convince our members of Congress that this is in their interest to try to fund the projects we give them, because they each have 15 projects that they can send to the appropriations committees, and then the committees decide which ones to fund. We've got to convince them all along the way how important these are. And we're working with staff to try to secure them again for next year. Now, I mentioned gridlock, but there are bills that are going to pass this year. There's a rail safety bill that I think has got some real chances of getting done right now. There's the multi-year FAA bill I talked about, and the annual defense bill and the farm bill. So you will see some things getting done. We can be really happy the infrastructure bill is in place right now. Next slide, please. So let's talk about BART, and then I'll segue over to Alka and let him talk. We really have been working over the last several years. I've been working on behalf of VTA to try to ensure that the delegation and the committees of jurisdiction, which I just talked about, all understand why BART is not just a regional priority, but it's a state priority and a national transportation priority, because we need to have them all understand so that there's no problems when the full funding grant agreement is sent to the Congress. And we need to have the active support of our senators and our delegation, the California delegation, to try to make sure that the FDA and DOT approve that as quickly as possible. So far, no bumps in the road. I have to say, there's as we made the transition into the Capital Investment Grant Program, even the conservative Republicans on the Appropriations Committee said that makes sense. So that's a good sign. I think we're starting off at a really good point. And I'll just say, taking a step back, we did advocate, not as successful as I would have hoped, to try to get some additional funding through the 3 bills, earmarks effectively for the BART project in the American Rescue Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, and then the infrastructure bill. We got tagged, I think, as a very partisan project in many respects there when we were trying to secure, tens of millions of dollars. But all of this is really aimed at trying to get a full funding grant agreement when VTA submits the application later this year. So with that, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Alka, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about BART in the context of the CIG program, which is Capital Investment Grant Program. This is a program that's unlike any other federal program in that it is not everyone has an opening every year to apply for money, and then everyone submits their projects, and then a handful get funded at a small amount. The Capital Investment Program is a pipeline. Projects come in whenever they want. They take years to get through, and they come out the other end with a lot of money. The trick is getting through the pipeline, and it's a very difficult process, one that it's all based on minimizing the risk to the federal taxpayer so that projects actually get built on schedule, on time, and on budget. I think the most important thing to understand is that getting through that pipeline it takes a lot of commitment from VTA and a lot of commitment from the local community and the state to show you have the money, to have it committed, because without that, you don't get the federal dollars. So just to give you a sense that the program is different than what you're used to seeing. Next slide, please. I also want to briefly talk about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, IIJA, which is the actual name of it. It's a huge amount of new money for transit and for rail and other things. And it's guaranteed money, right? It's money that's there, can't be taken away, and it's a huge opportunity. Next slide. A big chunk of that money comes in formula. So it comes to trans agencies in a formula, and then the agency can spend it on generally capital projects in certain areas. So, and it comes through by urbanized area, not actually through trans agencies. So the San Jose urban area got $103 million this year in federal formula dollars for transit. And that's a lot of money, but it's for anything in capital projects, bus funding, stick repair funding, paratransit funding. And it's consistent, comes every year, and it helps the budget be stable and consistent. Next slide, please. The next pot of money is all competitive, and by competitive I mean very few projects get funded with this, but it's a range of projects. Some are just transit specific, things like rail vehicle replacement, which is replacing rail vehicles that are old. Obviously bus and bus facility money, low-no buses. And then there are broader programs across DOT, RAISE and MEGA and Safe Streets that are highly competitive. States apply, cities apply, trans agencies apply. All of those they're all really well funded now, so everyone should be engaged in applying for them. But they're also still, I'd say, depending on the program, it's a tenth, 20% get accepted. Next slide. And I put the slide in here for a reason. In the rail world, most of the funding is for intercity passenger rail. However, the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program is eligible for commuter rail, so Caltrain can apply for that. And they can also apply for CRISI grants, which are a broad range of intercity rail, except for commuter rail is actually eligible for positive train control, which is a mandated safety system that had to be installed by 2020. Next slide. Now this is sort of the last part. In the Biden administration, they have all these new federal grants written in a bipartisan fashion, but the administration has the ability to add extra requirements. Every administration does it. In the Biden administration, it's Justice 40, labor requirements, workforce training, and climate change. Next slide. Justice 40 is, many of you probably heard of it, but it's requiring projects to really target the disadvantaged communities. And disadvantaged communities there's a big definition for it, but for transit, it's really low-income neighborhoods, persistent poverty neighborhoods, which can be different, neighborhoods of high employment. I think important for this area, high transportation or high housing cost burden really is a big effect, and of course, climate change. So I think when VTS apply for these grants, they really have to take their applications and steer them towards this if they want it to be competitive. Next slide. And then the other two things are labor. The grant applications have to sort of show you're going to help the labor market and you're going to be fair and at least fair, probably even friendly to union labor. Not such a big issue for here, but in your grant applications, you want to show that you've got support from your local labor, not just operators and construction labor, but also just labor in general, showing that you're moving people in blue-collar neighborhoods to where the jobs are, and you're making that happen. And those types of things, those types of letter support, and a focus in your grant applications will get you those grants. You also have to focus on workforce development. It's become a real issue across our country. We don't have the types of labor we need. So the administration's really focused on creating a pathway for people to get the training they need so they can be, whether it be construction or bus drivers. We need more of everybody. And the grant applications really have to focus on that. I think there's one more slide. Nope. That's all. Oh, I didn't purposely talk about climate change because I know, honestly, you're all way ahead of the rest of the country on that. So I know your applications will be great on that.
Happy to answer any questions.
Colleagues, any questions? Suds?
Yeah, I had a
Jane.
question about the FTA all stations accessibility. Is that for new stations, retrofitting?
That's probably mostly for retrofitting, but it's really to give transit agencies the ability to be ADA compliant.
But it's only 10 to 20% of applications get funded?
Yes, but just because everything's so competitive, right? They'll get, for any particular grant program, they'll get, if they've got $500 million, they'll get $2 billion worth of grant applications, and they pick the best and fund them.
And I'll just add, it's not something that VTA can apply for, but the program was created to help the legacy transit systems.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Director Din.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the presentation and for the work that you've been doing. I just had one question. When it comes to the Justice 40 initiative, if I'm remembering the title correctly, how do they define poverty? Is it based off of the federal poverty line, or is it related to regional cost of living itself?
I think it's actually a fairly broad definition, right? There is a federal poverty line, but in their definition, they look at things like housing cost and transportation cost. They look at persistent poverty as a big thing. These are areas that have had really high unemployment for decades. Appalachia is a good example of that, right? Where there's just huge swaths of those parts of those states that fit that definition. So I think it really varies by area, and you can define it is how you see it, but you also are competing against other places that might have more poverty. So.
Okay, thank you.
Member Lopez.
Thank you so much. We heard a little bit more about the House, and how that's being cut in half by the Republicans. Is there a thought Senate strategy where not only do Democrats have the majority, but we have our very highly esteemed Senator Dianne Feinstein, who's retiring, and from what I'm hearing from folks in Congress is that part of what that means is that she'll get higher support from than ever. You know, the majority aside, bipartisan support really for a lot of her requests. In a way that may not have been the case before, and that gives us an opportunity. Has there been consideration to that?
Well, I will say, I totally agree with you that Senator Feinstein has been a champion for so many different transportation projects, and particularly, she's been strongly supportive of VTA over the years. It is not uncommon, this is stepping back from her, it is not uncommon for members who are retiring to seek a legacy project of some sort. I can't say that I've had any conversations with their staff, but she could ask for something relatively significant, whether it's multiple projects or just one large project, we don't know, or she may not at all. It's to be determined. It's a little bit early to really kind of approach the staff about it. Now that she's finally announced that she's not going to run for re-election, there'll be time to have that kind of conversation. It's probably not going to happen in this year as much as it will be next year.
Okay, and I would simply encourage laying the groundwork for that. Thank
Absolutely.
You.
Great. I don't see any other questions. That was very informative. Carolyn?
Yeah, I think I actually want to thank our speaker, our federal, both Steve and Alka, for joining us this evening. It is useful. We meet every other week online, talk about grants and potential grants and where we're at and who do we need to contact. They help us a lot with our congressional delegation and work that. And then when we go to DC, they arrange all the meetings for us as well. If you are out there and are interested in meeting with anybody, please contact Jim. He can get a hold of either Steve or Alka, and they can actually arrange meetings if you have interest in meeting with anybody and promoting something, particularly in transportation for the city.
We're getting feedback somewhere. It may be from your mic still being on. We were getting a bit of feedback there.
Turn mine back on. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'd next like to introduce the Chief of Systems Safety and Security, Aston Green, who will provide the report for 5.2B.
This one?
Okay, got it. All right. Good evening, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, General Manager. My name is Aston Green. As stated, I am the Chief of System Safety and Security. Just a little reintroduction of myself. I am a 25-year veteran of law enforcement and security, beginning in New York State, Atlanta, Georgia, where I retired as a major commander for Water Police and Emergency Management, and most recently, prior to coming to VTA as your chief, I was the deputy chief for LA Metro System Safety and Security. So happy to be here, all but 6 months now, I think. So very excited about being part of the VTA family. This regular presentation is a brief overview of the crime stats associated with our law enforcement contract support, particularly the Santa Clara Sheriff's Office and San Jose City Police Department. And so you'll get an opportunity to see that snapshot. What we show you with the stats are trends. And we typically compare them between year to year or month to month. And at some point in the future, you'll see an evolution of this presentation to include more data for your edification. In addition to the stats, we usually provide significant updates and we share proactive security safety measures that we think is worthy of the board's attention. So next slide. And you can go to the next slide, actually. Next slide. Is it? Okay, no problem. Thank you. They weren't expecting that. All right. So what you see here primarily is a significant reduction in certain categories for our crime stats comparing February of 2022 to February of 2023, where our total incidence of reports dropped almost 30%. And in major categories, whether it's operator assaults or serious violent crimes, mental health, we track this information so that we could adjust resources and strategies accordingly, working with our law enforcement partners. Next slide. One of the things that we'd like to do for visual appreciation is just show a monthly comparison. So what you're looking at here is a bar graph that shows where we were in 2022 at this point in time compared to where we are in 2023. Now, previously, a lot of that data was skewed due to COVID ridership data changing, which had an impact on crime stats, but we're starting to balance out now, and we're able to kind of see some real comparative numbers without any of the skewed data. Next slide. I want to draw your attention to this because on the right side of the slide, you'll see what is an ongoing campaign to help shape the public consciousness in relation to the safety of our operators. I'll mention more about this a little bit later in my remarks related to the driver referral that was issued in June of last year. But I just show this so that you get an opportunity to see what is an ongoing campaign. And it gives the ridership an opportunity to learn what is accepted and not accepted behaviors on the system, and an opportunity to download our VTA Alerts app so that they can use it for their own safety as well. And to the left of the slide, you'll see the operator assault cases, which we are currently at 2 for this calendar year. Next slide. What you're seeing here are operator assault trends. This is an area that we focus on, of course. What we want to do is be very transparent about how our security resources are being impactful in terms of protecting our operators is one of my top priorities. And so you'll continue to see data related to operator assaults and those trends. Next slide. As the year progresses, you'll see this pie graph change a little bit. Right now, it looks a little de minimis because you only see the data for 2 cases, and those suspects are at large. But as the year progresses, you'll see the number of arrests, the number of citations. Particularly, I think of interest are the number of cases that are sent to the district attorney for review. And collectively, you'll get a really great picture of the level of effort we are taking to keep our operators safe. Next slide. This is San Jose Police Department. Again, you know, the data here is going to be skewed. That big red 300% is really de minimis because we're only talking about 3 cases compared to last year. So that's why that number looks like that. But as the year progresses, we'll expect to see some changes. And this particular slide may change its format as well. Next slide. Total incident reports, monthly comparison. Again, the numbers are very, very small given their portion of coverage for their law enforcement services, but we still want to highlight it because it is part of our security, our layered security approach. Next slide. What we also track are our citations, and you'll get an opportunity to see this change throughout the year as well. The number of passenger checked versus the citation issued. And this is the work coming from our fare inspectors. Next slide. as I alluded to earlier, related to our security measures that are surrounding some of the recommendations from the board referral from last year. You'll see some of the highlights here of some of the ongoing efforts and initiatives. I mentioned the first bullet earlier, which is the public campaign. You saw that that moniker earlier today, but in addition to that, there are two other highlights that I want to present for your edification. One is the work that the Sheriff's Department is doing related to referring cases or flagging specific cases and sending them to the DA's office. And that allows them to make a request to the court for both restraining orders and a stay-away orders from all VTA buses, trains, and stations. These are those high-profile, serious aggravated assault cases against our operators. This partnership allows us to help protect them from repeat offenders. And perhaps even more significant, as part of our legislative agenda, we are now working with Assemblyman Evan Lowe to author a bill, AB 1735, to add VTA to the list of California transit agencies with prohibition order authority. This puts us in the same category as BART and as LA Metro to be able to issue criminal trespass warrants for repeat offenders on our system. And then lastly, this was also associated with the driver referral, was to reach out to our industry stakeholders or industry partners to do a peer review. And so APTA has accepted and agreed. We actually start this process next week. We have a former chief of police from MARTA, a former chief of police from New Jersey Transit, and one from Houston, in addition to an APTA security expert that will be participating in 2 phases of a comprehensive peer review of our entire security program, of which they're going to make some final recommendations for, so that we can ensure that we're headed toward meeting industry best practices. And lastly, I'm excited to announce that this week, FEMA and TSA announced the Transit Security Grant Program, which is a very important funding opportunity for us to build on the technology side of our security program. And VTA has not applied for that in almost a decade. So I'm excited about the opportunity to work with our grants team to actually look for this funding opportunity to bolster our program. So that's it. I'll take any questions.
Vice Chair Chavez.
Thank you. I just wanted to start by saying, Aston, how refreshing this this presentation was, and particular, you know, when the drivers initially brought up the concerns about what was happening to them at the work site, I don't think they felt like the administration, I don't mean anybody in particular, but I just don't think they felt like we were taking it very seriously. And so I just want to say thank you to all the team who moved us this far, particularly on that issue. And then the second, you know, it's more of a question, and I'm not sure if it should be responded to today, but something I just hope we're thinking about. And that is that as we continue to get more constrained on resources, whether that's the Sheriff's Department or police officers in San Jose, I am very interested in understanding how you anticipate over the next year and a year and a half about how we're leveraging resources between not just the sheriffs, the police officers, and our security details. And part of the reason I'm asking the question, colleagues, is that about a month or so ago, the county invested money in a shared response so that we were able to remove firearms from people who had red flags. And part of the way we did that is we're using some county dollars to subsidize our police partners, because our sheriff's department, as excellent as they are, don't have enough people to do that job by themselves. And so I would just be interested in having you give some thought to that. And I'm not sure, I forget the names of all of our committees, but you report out to
SSTPNO.
Okay.
Yes.
If that is, I don't know who's chairing that committee, if the chair is here.
Yes. Deb? Davis?
Oh, great. Sorry, Jeff. More homework we're just giving it back and forth to each other. But I think it would be really important to at least make sure we're having conversations with all of our partners so that we're prepared again to deal with less resources, particularly as we're getting more and more people coming back on transit.
Yeah,
Thank you.
excellent. Okay, thank you.
Member Lopez and then Member Torres.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the presentation. This is incredibly important work that you're doing, and I support anything we can do to be responsive to the concerns of and safety of our operators. Just a couple of suggestions. One would be that perhaps for some of those numbers that look like a big percentage increase may be helpful. Not just it's good context in terms of the noting the absolute amounts, but also to note the percentage of ridership, because those numbers look different from 2022 to 2023. So I think that would be helpful context for when we receive these reports to make it a little bit easier to compare oranges to oranges. And then I would just note, and if this is an item of discussion in the future for the SSTPO committee as vice chair of that committee, I'd be fine as well. But perhaps for future consideration, just an observation that when we for fare enforcement, that when we have attempts nearly in the number of 10,000, and then you're actually catching people in the mid to low single digits. I question whether that's the best use of the limited resources that we have, as Vice Chair Chavez noted. There are ways that we can be more efficient and support the other really important work that is noting, and so maybe there's a prioritization process as part of that. But I'd be interested in at least knowing the trade-offs in dollars and cents of what it means to be having that level of enforcement for those numbers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Member Torres.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you for this organization. Thank you to this organization for making sure that our operators and our riders are safe, especially our operators. I have a few questions, and forgive me if I'm asking them, and I could always ask them offline as well. One of them is, when there is a disturbance on the light rail, do we prioritize that response if it's like a mental health issue or a real crime, gun crime, whatever the case may be, right? What I don't want is, I don't want to I want to know if we are prioritizing those calls, where if it's a mental health issue or a real grave concern.
Yeah, so
Which
depending
both are, but.
Yeah, depending on the nature of the call, for our responding law enforcement partners, they would make that assessment. They do a good job at de-escalation and being able to determine whether or not a situation requires supportive services. Let's say, for example, dealing with persons who may be unhoused on the system. That may not necessarily result in an arrest or in a citation, but in connecting them to some supportive services. So that assessment is something that they're very conscious of.
Okay, great. Great. And the other one is, I'm the downtown council member for downtown San Jose. And when we do outreach or go to our events for small businesses, a lot of small business owners have expressed grave concern regarding crime on the 1st and 2nd Street light rail stations, which is in between San Fernando and Santa Clara Street. And my question is, how do we determine what's a VTA call or a SJPD call? Because they express all the time that they see the drug dealing happen, they see the crime happening, they call 911, no one shows up. Sometimes the crime is happening literally on the platform. How do we respond to that?
Yeah, so let me say, typically it defers to the jurisdiction that has ownership. However, the common practice for law enforcement is who's ever closest is able to respond, and then you can just hand that case over to the jurisdiction of ownership. So I don't know specifically for this location, but sometimes it's really almost a line in the sand determining who owns the responsibility. But I would imagine that any available law enforcement resources would be able to handle the situation and determine who owns it after the fact.
Great.
Does that answer your question? I'm hoping
It does. We can definitely talk offline
Sure.
about that, because we're starting to organize our small businesses. I think it's important for either VT or SJPD to be at some of these small business meetings, so we can definitely
Okay,
talk offline about that. So thank you. And I have two more questions. Forgive me. The other one is fair enforcement. If folks can't afford to pay their citation, does VTA can they pay it in payments? Can it be forgiven if they do volunteer hours? I just don't want, folks to be riddled with debt or, I don't know, a warrant if they have this citation out.
So no, there's no criminal penalty, if that's what you're asking, in terms of a warrant issued. And we do support, depending on the circumstances, courtesy rides for those patrons. So that is an ongoing challenge, obviously. And sort of connected to the earlier comment about fair inspection and the best use of that resources, that's one of the things that I would be having the APTA peer review committee take a look at, so that we can make sure we're not only making the best use of the resources, but we are also, being sensitive to different scenarios that involve fare evasion.
Great. And the last one is, I'm forgive me if I'm asking this, but yesterday, a rumor took off on social media regarding the poor little skunk that was killed by our VTA light rail station yesterday. I know people are laughing, but we did really get some concerns from folks who actually thought it was a human head or human body. And we told the folks on social media, no, it's not true, it's a skunk, but folks still think that's a human. Can that be on the record that it is a skunk, that it was a skunk?
Yes, it was non-human.
Great. Great. That's good to know.
For the
but
record.
I know that some of our community members are still skeptical, but we will continue to say that it was a skunk, because I do believe you. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification. I'm trying to recall which slide it was, maybe 6 or 7 that had your first more comprehensive table. Maybe further back, I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's the table, not the bar graph. This.
Okay.
And is this the most comprehensive overview of incidents, this table? Does this represent it?
At this time, yes.
Yeah. So these are some very significant declines, along with significant ridership increases, as Member Lopez was raising the question on really correlating incidents related to ridership levels.
Yeah.
What do you attribute this progress to?
Wow, that's very good. Excellent question. I actually have seen a phenomenon of crime increasing as COVID was having a ravishing impact on ridership. And there is criminologists theorize that the amount of desolation in stations created an environment for persons to do things that they would not normally do when there is population. So there is security in ridership, in a sense. And I think that may be one of the most obvious reasons, without doing academic research and surveying. I would argue that more people reduce the amount of crimes of opportunity. So that would be my assessment.
And anonymity, that there's just...
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've seen
interesting.
that in many, even in certain security investments. Like, for example, when you have cameras on conveyances, you can sometimes see an immediate reduction in crime because people know that they're being recorded. So there are a lot of tools in the chest, but I would say significantly that ridership helps.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Member Dean.
Sorry to come in after you, but your line of questioning was very strong, so it inspired one for myself as well. I really appreciate this slide. I think it's very helpful and really illustrates kind of a portrait of where we've been and where we are. I'm not going to ask you to give me these numbers off the top of your head, but if we get a presentation like this in the future, I would love to also see a column that includes what the average for each of these are, just like the monthly average for the preceding year, because especially with some of the really small digit numbers like operator assaults or serious violent offenses, the variance is really good to see, but because it's so small, those variances can be quite high.
Yeah.
I'd love to understand and get that snapshot of what the average also looks like. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Carolyn, back to you.
So I think I mentioned earlier that the ridership report is attached, and as well as the security statistics. You got some this evening, and so that concludes my report. And thank you, Aston.
Yes, thank you for a very informative report. So that concludes Carolyn's reports. We'll now take comments from the public on the GM report. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
Yes, Chair, we have Anne Marie. Anne, please accept the unmute and begin speaking when you're ready. Hopefully we can hear you now.
Yes. Hello? Yes, thank you for a very informative report.
We can hear you, Anne.
That concludes Carolyn's reports. We'll now take. Okay. Yeah, we have a delay here, so.
Anne, we will try to unmute you again.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to walk out because I'm getting feedback because I'm having technical difficulties on my side. I would like to thank Carolyn and Mr. Green for their reports. I'd also like to reiterate that we are only in February, and so this report on the crimes against the operators is unusually low, and hopefully it stays that way. But I also would like the board to remember that not all assaults are reported. These are just ones that have been reported to law enforcement. And I forgot what else I wanted to say. I'm sorry. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you. So public comment for item 5.2 is now closed. Do we have any other questions for Carolyn? Don't see any. So that takes us to through the chairperson's report. And so my report, first, I just want to remind colleagues that staff is offering a tour of the VTA Cerrone bus yard on the morning of March 14th and again on the morning of March 30th. And just want to encourage folks to sign up for it. And then, and I think it's both very informative to us as members and also very appreciated by the staff, the rank and file staff members. So, and then I did want to report that the G&A committee also had the Auditor General report today on the long-term financial sustainability plan, and the G&A committee is planning in May to have a in-depth study session on that plan, which is going to be an important part of our financial future. So we haven't set the exact date and time, but want to let everybody know that. So we're now moving on to item 5.3A, which is approval of appointments to committees. There's a slight change on the appointment for the Mobility Partnership. And we have on our screens the recommended appointees.
So moved?
All righty, I will second. And do we have any discussion? And do we have any public comment on these appointments?
We do not have any hands raised, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll close public comment, and all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That passes unanimously. All right. So now we're moving on to the consent calendar, item number 6. And it's 6.1 through 6.5. Members of the public who'd like to speak on consent items, please raise your hand now or on the app, or press 9 on your phone. And colleagues, is there anyone who wants to pull an item off of consent? I see none. So, and do we have any abstentions or recusals for the consent calendar? No, we don't. And so, any public comments on the consent calendar?
I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Thank you. Great. Oh, and I'll close public comment on consent, and Member Chavez has moved approval. Member Dean has seconded. And on that note, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Nay? We're in great agreement tonight. All right. Now we'll go to the regular agenda, and the first item is 7.1, which is an update on the BART Operations Control Center project. And Evelyn Ho, Program Manager for the BART Silicon Valley Extension, along with Krishna Davi, Deputy Director of the SVRT BART Project Controls, will provide our report. Welcome. See, Greg, are you introducing this?
You said go ahead, didn't you? All right.
I did.
Good evening to the board. Thank you for having us here. I just wanted to give a quick intro to this. As we had talked about at the very beginning during the orders of the day, this was initially identified to be an action item. But I would say after some healthy conversation during the Administration and Finance Committee, the staff determined that it would be best for us to, as a staff, to go back and come up with an agreement with BART that we felt we could bring back to the board and get your approval from that perspective. And so, to ensure that the board has a better understanding of when that actually comes forward, we felt like we would still go forward with the presentation that was made as an information item for you to at least understand and see what's going on. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Evelyn, and she will take us through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gray. Once again, my name is Evelyn Ho, the Program Manager for the VTA Operations Maintenance Agreement. Today, we would like to give you an update on the BART's Operations Control Center Cost-Sharing Agreement as related to VTA's BART Silicon Valley Extension, also known as SVRT Extension. Next slide, please. To give you, first off, we would like to give you some background on the 5 major VTA and BART agreements. Back in November 2001, VTA and BART executed a comprehensive agreement. The purpose of that agreement is to identify the roles and responsibility for SVRT extension, design, and construction. SVRT extension is also known as BSV. BSV comprises of two phases, BSV1 and BSV2. BSV1 is in revenue service, therefore this agreement governs BSV2 project. On the last column, this shows the major funding sources. There are 4 major funding sources for the BSV2 project. The next 2 agreements were executed in 2013. The purpose of those 2 agreements are to are for the maintenance needs for BSV1. VTA and BART are collaborating to complete the obligations for those two agreements, and the funding sources for those two agreements are BSV1 full funding grant agreement and 2000 Measure A. Next slide, please. Continue on to provide the background on the VTA BART agreements. VTA and BART executed operations and maintenance agreement in 2020. The purpose of that is to identify the roles and responsibility for operation and maintenance of the SVRT extension. This agreement is ongoing, and this agreement governs BSV1. The major funding sources for this agreement is 2008 Measure B and SVRT fair revenues. The last agreement is the BART OCC cost sharing agreement. The purpose is to fund the VTA share of the OCC retrofit to accommodate the schedule need for BSV2. This agreement is currently in negotiation, and the funding source for this agreement is 2000 Measure A. Next slide, please. The OCC retrofit started off as the OCC project. This slide is to give you some background on the OCC project. Per the comprehensive agreement that was executed in 2001, VTA is responsible to pay for the modification costs to the BART core system for operations of the SVRT extension. The OCC project will increase the capacity of the OCC to accommodate the future operational requirements for BART core system and the SVRT extension. BART will make all decisions relating to design and construction of the OCC. Next slide, please. This slide is to highlight the OCC project evolution. In March 2016, VTA and BART executed principles of agreement for the OCC project. Subsequently, BART pursued design up to 65%, and it revealed that the OCC project would have substantially higher cost, longer schedule, and additional construction risk. Therefore, BART determined that the best and the most cost-effective option for meeting the future operational requirements would be to retrofit BART's existing facility, calling it OCC retrofit. This past fall, VTA and BART executed revised principles of agreement for the OCC retrofit. Next slide, please. This slide is a side-by-side comparison of the OCC project and the OCC retrofit. As you can see, the OCC project has more major features. However, the revised project cost estimate for the OCC project is almost 3 times more than the OCC retrofit. Next slide, please. Continue on to provide the OCC project and OCC retrofit overview. The OCC project does not meet the BSV2 schedule needs, and the OCC retrofit does. The OCC project also has a high constructability risk, while the OCC retrofit has a much lower constructability risk. VTA's possible financial commitment for the OCC project using the revised cost estimate that will set VTA's financial commitment of approximately $41 million. VTA's possible financial commitment for OCC retrofit is able to cap at $26.4 million for a period of 20 years with limited exceptions. Next slide, please. This slide shows the 3 limited capital cost exceptions. VTA and BART will work jointly on future cost-sharing agreements to fund capital cost improvements for the OCC if deemed necessary due to these 3 capital cost exceptions. Now I would like to turn the presentation update to Greg to finish off.
Thanks, Evelyn. Next slide, please. This next slide basically identifies more about what I refer to as that healthy conversation that went on within the Administration and Finance Committee. And I'd like to just go through each of these and just recognize, kind of the impact for each with an understanding that this is really what's going to help drive the negotiation process with BART. It's not deviating too far from what we had initially intended, but again, when we're discussing this and recognizing how many changes might be offered during this particular process, our decision was let's just go ahead and negotiate the agreement, bring that agreement to this body to decide on. One of the items that that was discussed was the payment that was going to be made, the remaining payment of $24.4 million. I first want to say that I was incorrect during A&F, that my initial understanding was that this payment was going to be done on a cost reimbursement perspective. It was meant always to be a lump sum payment. Now, I want to make sure everyone understands that that's been a negotiated item for a long time with BART. There's been an understanding was going to happen. That's what they were going to receive, and that's going to be part of what they're expecting as we move forward. I'm offering that a solution is there because I think their need is, from my perspective, more from showing the funding source is available. And if we continue to hold those dollars, that's hard for them to do. So the option here that I expect us as part of the negotiation will be for us to simply provide that as into an escrow. The access to it is still based on us seeing the invoices and knowing that they're approved invoices, but then the dollars are no longer in our possession. They can be seen as a funding source by BART for BART, and therefore they don't have to worry about, are those dollars ever going to be there? They will be there always for them to be done. So I think we'll be able to get through that pretty well. The other item is the clear definitions to those exceptions that Evelyn just talked about in the previous slide. They're very vague, and I want to make sure everyone understands. When we went through this retrofit conversation with BART, the concept of the $26.4 million on a $62.7 million project basically implies that we are funding 40-some-odd% of that project. What we were looking to do is, recognizing the $26 million was fundamentally an agreed-upon number, we're trying to cap our exposure long-term. And so we're in this process have told them we don't want any more capital costs being charged to us. It's been a little contention with that, and I think we've got to resolve that, and that's where I think some of these exceptions were identified. Now, in these conversations, going to the third item, if we determine that there are some capital costs through definitions and through more specificity of what those exceptions really are, if we do believe that we have to contribute further, then we also need to set whatever that ceiling is before we begin contributing. And that ceiling will be set based on some percentage, and in a lot of cases it's based on whether it's track miles or other measures that we've got of the overall core. But you're looking at a number somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million before we would then begin contributing capital costs. So again, this is part of that conversation with them to get to that agreement. And I can at least say that the fourth item has effectively been resolved because it is already built in to our current O&M agreement as to the resolution process. So from this point, again, wanted to give you guys an understanding of what was happening and how we will go forward with negotiating. And our next steps, as we've talked about, we will negotiate with BART, develop an agreement that we believe both parties can accept. And then it's our job as staff to bring that agreement to you, because if we do come to agreement with BART, then we will fully support. And you will see that support from staff as we present it to this body in hopes of getting an agreement. So with that, I will leave it for any questions that may be asked.
Member Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. On the 24.4, it's not a lump sum, it's going to go to escrow. So if BART does not come up with enough invoices for the 24.4, does it mean that the rest would come back to us?
That will be part of the conversation to understand. If I were to answer that question quickly right now, if they don't get to what I would say the 62.7 is probably the number I'd be looking at. If they don't get to that number, then there should be some sort of a payback to VTA for their portion of that. But that's also going to be part of that discussion as we move forward.
Right, and then the second thing is 24.4 the maximum that we're going to be out of our pocket?
That's what we are hoping to set, and that's exactly the conversations we've had, again, because the upfront percentage that we're contributing. And again, this goes back for many years as to how this 24.4, 26.4 was originally identified. And there is an expectation. I have to be, I want to be very transparent here. There's been many conversations over several years that this 26.4 is something that they are effectively counting on. And I understand that. And that's part of this conversation. If we're doing that, then you have to understand we can't have further costs. And if we do, there's got to be a limit before that number begins. So
got to have a cap. Thank you.
May I? Oh.
Yeah, and Carolyn, were you wanting to wait in at this point in time?
Oh, I just want to say that I think the cap that we're looking at is the current retrofit of 65.1 million, that we would look at it for them as a cap. And the other is the 24.4. Evelyn and I negotiated this many years ago, but the 24.4 was based on the value, and then it was, then they knew they were going to spend it escalated costs. So that was the reason why at the time they wanted it lump sum, because we were giving it to them in this year's dollars, even though they weren't going to spend it till later. So we negotiated it down, and then our cap was based on the escalation.
And Member Lopez and then Member Blankley.
Thank you. Greg, I'd like to understand the last point that you're making about the 20-year capital exclusion. Is that referring to potential future or needed future improvements or maintenance to the project? Or is it referring to cost overruns on the project itself?
I would say it's both. I mean, so any cost overruns, we would be capped at the 26.4 total. It's really about future needs from an OCC perspective. So again, remembering that the original conversation was that this was for a new OCC, but because of costs, they decided to retrofit. Our concern was that in 7, 8, 10 years, a need for a new OCC would come forward, and we did not want to have to be party to that, again, because this decision was being made for a longer-term basis. So we're trying to cap total capital expenditures as it relates to this OCC retrofit from both cost overruns as well as new capital, replaced capital, anything of that nature that's true capital expenses related to the OCC retrofit.
Okay, and I'll just close with a comment, which is that much more important to me than the absolute amount is having crystal clarity on any cost overruns and who's responsible for that. So that point is particularly important to me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Member Blankley?
Yes, and we at ANF absolutely addressed all of these things that you're talking about. I did my best to clearly put that in the report that's in our packets tonight too. But it was 26.4. How did it get to 24.4?
The total we've talked is 26.4. We've already contributed to, when was it? A couple of years ago?
Yeah, it's about 10 years ago.
Okay, so
as
the
part of
total-
the-
So 2 of the 26.4 has already been paid.
Okay, so
now we're talking
26.4, it's just that 2 has already been paid, so now we're at the 24.4. What did not come up at ANF was the possibility of putting the money in escrow. So that's something we're all hearing for the first time, and maybe that's a good solution as long as we can get that money back. Because that was the concern, is that if you part with the money, who knows that it's going to get spent on the actual retrofitting if you're giving it in advance, right? Money's gone, then what? And this whole thing is a retrofit that was supposed to have been new, and it's a retrofit that was probably needed, the need for which was not entirely triggered by BART coming into Santa Clara County. So we're being very diligent and careful at the ANF meeting on our behalf. So just wanted to point that out to everybody.
Member Dan?
Thank you. And thank you to staff for being here for the presentation and for all the work that you're doing. Before I jump into my question, just based off of the conversation that's unfolding, I definitely agree wholeheartedly with what my colleague member Lopez was saying about the importance for that kind of clarity when it comes to cost overruns. And I am very glad to hear about this escrow idea because I agree with what my colleagues were saying and that I'd feel more comfortable with the money being an escrow or by invoice rather than lump sum. But jumping into my question, I envision that our partnership with BART on this, similar to how it has been, will be collaborative and positive. And from that same spirit, I think getting regular audits would help us in ensuring that we're collaborating well. Is there anything in place right now or discussions about what regular audits of this would look like, or can we get regular audits reports to the board?
Yes, Member Dean, yes, it is in the O&M agreement, and that's kind of the overarching agreement that we can definitely do transfer provisions to take care of that, your concern.
Okay, and then what would the sort of cadence of that look like? How regularly could we get those kinds of audit reports?
Because, like you mentioned, Member Dean, that it is a partnership, and that is something that during negotiation we can discuss and find out what's appropriate, the most appropriate interval.
Okay,
for both
perfect.
parties.
Thank you so much.
Vice Chair Chavez.
Thank you, and I do want to thank the staff and really my colleagues on ANF for having such a robust discussion. A couple things that I would just like to say. One is that, you know, one of the challenges we've had with our partnership with BART, just to be direct, is that it hasn't always been collaborative and it hasn't always been clear, but it's a very long relationship, and so every time we get an opportunity to reestablish a good working relationship, I want to make sure we're taking advantage of that. That said, what I will just say to staff is that the one concern I would just raise is that for the 3 items that are left, they don't feel like negotiated items that we can negotiate to a resolution, because they do feel to me like bottom lines for us. But here's what my point is. My point is that we're not going to put any more money in. And as a matter of fact, one of the concerns I have is that we ended up starting with the amount of money that we did, given that the product is completely different than what we anticipated. So in terms of invoices or process, to me, this is not really negotiable. It's in part because we're buying something different with the same amount of money that we anticipated. The second point I would raise is that we know that we are not contributing to this because of an increased use on our part. We're contributing to this because BART had a hole in the donut and they knew we had cash, and that's why we're having this conversation with them. And again, trying to build a relationship and a partnership, and eventually we're going to be, you know, contributing and using more of the system. And then on the exceptions, I just really want to emphasize how incredibly clear and rare the possible exceptions could be. Like, to me, it's an earthquake is kind of it. So anything else beyond that is gracious from my perspective. And then I think that the 20-year capital exclusion, I don't think that's optional. And I am still wanted to raise one issue, and that is to make sure I understand from when the 20-year calendar starts. And I think actually, Marie, you raised such a good point about this, because I just took it at face value that 20 years meant the facility's open and from that time forward, not all the time it takes to build it, particularly given how long we've already been discussing this with them. If we'd used the triggering point of when they started the project, whatever that project was, we'd be 10 years into it now. So to me, ribbon cutting is the beginning. So anyway, thank you, colleagues, for letting me talk to the staff again about something they're tired of hearing me say. So thank you.
And I had one follow-up question. So it's great that we're capping the dollar amount, and that we have the escrow that we're going to negotiate firmly for. But what happens if they aren't able to deliver the product for the 60+ million, and they run up against a wall? And do we have a mechanism by which, or should we be negotiating a mechanism by which we're doing a holdback of the escrow, or some other way in which they can't spend our money and we still don't see the product?
Yes, I mean, I think part of our concern is going to be the actual project being delivered. And so however that gets framed within this cost-sharing agreement will need to be addressed, yes.
Well, I'm trying to visualize how we can have some degree of additional leverage that it'll get delivered, even if they spend all our money. So should we have a final payment that's a sizable portion of that pull from the escrow that only gets delivered upon completion, not upon their expenditures?
That is a fair point. It is one that we need to consider.
Okay, thanks.
I'm with you.
Member Abe Koga.
Thank you, Chair.
forgive me if this is a question that's been asked before. I'm kind of new to this item, but given that these are negotiating items, but we've heard from the board that they're not really negotiable, they're, pretty much final. What happens if you don't reach agreement? Like, what is the downside to BTA for not having reached an agreement?
I would say that I don't think that's an option. I mean, I think at some point, we've got to do, we as staff have to do our job to come to terms with a negotiated agreement that we can then bring to the board and get agreement. And so, I'm not going to say that some of these items aren't necessarily non-negotiable. I think there's nuances within here that it'll be up to us to, one, convince Bart this is our belief, and then number two, convince this body that nuance exists and here's what it means. And I think that's where we've got the task at hand, which is one of the reasons why we didn't want to have an action being taken today, because there are just so many different variables that could exist. And so now it's us bringing it to you and convincing.
Okay, so I guess just to be even more blunt then,
Yes.
what happens, like, would we not be able to use the OCC, or what would be the, if we didn't reach agreement, what would happen?
I think they would wind up, for right now, needing to currently use their current OCC, it would be my guess. And I think then there would be some tremendous pressure being placed on us from others that this particular facility needs to be built, and then it would force everyone to come back to the table and come to the right terms to make that happen. I don't think anybody wants to jeopardize the system. That's definitely not the case. But it's got to be a fair approach in which we go about doing it.
And I guess that was my point, is that I feel like Bart seems to need the funding from VTA to make this happen, so doesn't that give us some leverage? But
yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And Carolyn?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to the OCC, it benefits both BART and for us. We're building 6 miles more of our extension, and then they also need it. I mean, if you ever had a tour of their existing OCC, it's quite quaint. Yeah, would be a nice word. It's not modernized, but I've walked through it. So there's a number of items. So it does benefit both. So it works. But I just want to be clear on sort of what we had today and what we heard is that, and I do understand the point of a non-negotiable, which is that we are not contributing this as a lump sum, and we are going to set up an escrow account we will develop clear definitions to any exceptions, if any seem to be reasonable, and we'll identify a cost ceiling amount to deal with any of the future contributions. I do think the dispute resolution, that's done, but I think the other area is that addressing if there's like a default, they don't build it or something, what do we do? What ends up happening? I mean, I don't think they will, but I also think our attorneys would like to know what we would do as well. So I think we would want to handle that. So if that's the direction, then we know where we're going when we bring this back.
And I think, sorry. We need to see if we have any public comments on this.
We have one public speaker. Eugene, please accept and mute.
Evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, Eugene Bradley, Silicon Valley Transit Users. Just looking at this agreement between VTA and BART and how part of this is in negotiation so far. My biggest question, given all this, what happens, who pays for what side, VTA or BART, once this phase 2, which is already 100% over budget, continues to escalate in costs, particularly with inflation? Who would be in charge of the overruns? Would it be VTA, BART, the contractors on the project? That would be the biggest question that really ought to be answered here. So, thank you.
And we have another public speaker.
Hey, good evening. My name is Mark DeLong, for those who don't know me. Just want to say thank you to Greg, Evelyn, and Krishna. I know we're in good hands with them looking after our interests. I would like to offer some food for thought. One of our other funding partners is the California Energy Commission. We have a grant with them. And one of the things, we have monthly check-ins and calls with them. They check in with us and they specifically ask regarding the CEC portion of the project funding being spent and the local match portion of the project funding being spent. They want to make sure that there's a consistent drawdown. So if we have an escrow account, maybe in the means and methods of the drawdown, that we don't draw down the VTA portion of the escrow account for that project, or it gets drawn down at the same rate that the BART portion. Just some food for thought. I know there's a lot of devil in the details, but thank you.
Chair, there are no more hands raised in Zoom.
Thank you. So this was an informational item, and so we don't need a motion. Thank you very much. So our next item is 7.2, the SB 129 Joint Labor Management Committee update. Jay Bailey, our Director of Policy and Compliance, and Mark DeLong will provide the report. Welcome.
Actually, I think it's Steve Jovel will be providing the report. Is that correct?
Sorry.
No, we had it wrong.
That's okay. We gave the wrong.
Welcome. Can you move that? Just move it closer, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. I am Jay Bailey. This is Steve Jovel, Transportation Superintendent and also the President of AFSCME, Local 1101. We are here to give our monthly update from the SB 129 Committee, which you may remember is the committee charged with giving advice to the agency for administration of the $20 million grant administered through the California Workforce Development Board that was granted to us following the tragedy of 5/26/21 to support worker health, mental health, and physical health, safety initiatives, as well as our very large culture and climate initiative that we have going on. Also with us here tonight are other members of the committee. You can see we are all very enthusiastic about this work. We have John Pospashek, who is the Vice President of ATU Local 265 and also a bus operator here with us. Mark DeLong, who's not sitting next to me. Jeez. Assistant Transportation Engineer and the Secretary Treasurer of TAEA Local 121. Raj Sadev is not with us tonight, but he is a Senior Architect and the President of TAEA Local 21. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Hanyet Borshrakim, who's the Technical Project Manager with us and the Chief Steward of SEIU Local 521. Tammy Denoto, who's the President of SEIU Local 521 and a longtime VTA employee in our marketing department. And Sylvia Vasquez, Transit Division Supervisor and the Secretary of AFSCME Local 1101. We all work together on this Joint Labor Management Committee, and we see a lot of each other at least once a week. So thank you all. We will give you a high-level overview every month, as we've done with just a few of the highlights of what the committee is doing. But tonight, you'll also find in your package some details of the timeline, as well as some numbers of what we have spent from this $20 million grant. We are continuing to internally audit our spending in all of our areas, and so those numbers will be updated every month, but we wanted to give you an idea of what we have spent so far. So our first slide is our overall SB 129 committee action that we've taken, and this is the March progress update. Steve is going to talk specifically about our climate and culture initiative, which is taking up a lot of our time and which is $3 million worth of this grant. So under mental health support services, we are continuing to provide mental health support services to our impacted employees in a variety of ways. We have our on-call clinicians who can make appointments through directly. All of that information is on our hub. Also, our HR department and our wellness department helps with those appointments. We also continue to have counselors available at the 526 Resiliency Center, which of course we are in partnership with the county on. We have renewed the contracts with all of our providers so that there won't be any gap in service, and those contracts have been extended through 2024, which is when this grant is until the end of the fiscal year 2024. We also have some very specialized programs for those most impacted by this tragedy and who continue to need intense mental health support as we go along. The Healing and Remembrance, you may recall, for those of you that were here last year, we had the 1-year anniversary in May, which we had at the site. We were in the process of demolishing Building B, or had just demolished Building B, which was the site of the most of the tragedy. And we are now planning for the 2nd year remembrance. As we go along, we're mindful of that balance between remembering and allowing people to heal and move on. So we're engaged in a lot of discussion about that right now, including with our mental health providers. And we are also planning the permanent memorial garden, and that design and procurement is all in progress right now. And we've just today had discussions about what the anticipated cost of that will be finally. In our employee support efforts, we're continuing the operation of the Resiliency Center with regular programming, and our mental health support specialists are always on the ground there. We have implemented and continue to administer the program of mental health leave days for all employees. So part of the grant was providing 3 days per year per employee for a mental health day, which is a no questions asked day. You just use it when you feel that you need to just take a day off from work. But I really want to give a shout out here to our timekeepers, our dispatchers, our human resources personnel, and our payroll personnel. Because while it is easy to say, yes, we're going to give 3 additional days to 2,100 employees, it takes a lot of coordination, particularly in our operations division. So I just wanted to give a shout out for how much work goes into making that happen. And we are continuing to grow a very exciting program with our peer-to-peer support program. And in this, I want to point out the efforts of JP, John Pospashek, who's the Vice President for ATU, who's really been instrumental in bringing this along. And as we go into Mental Health Awareness Month, we're going to be doing a lot of work with this. So wanted to say thank you to JP and others that have been really directly involved with that. Steve is going to talk about the organizational development, so I will leave that to him. And then as we go forward into the winter and spring, we're really excited about our organizational development efforts that Steve's going to talk about. Of course, we will continue to provide the mental health support services, and we're hoping to also turn to and tackle a few of the other specific items that are listed in the grant that we haven't been able to get to yet or haven't had the need to get to yet. So, Steve?
So with that, next slide, please. And good evening to the board chair, vice chair, and to all the board members. So as you see here on the key insights, there's been a lot of data collected over the last several months through focus groups, interviews, and also the employee surveys, which have touched all of our employees in all work locations that work call shifts throughout the agency. So there was a lot of data that was brought in. We've just hit a major milestone in this climate and culture change where we've received, as the SB 129 committee, all the key insights and some of the overview on the findings already. The executive team was just presented with some of the same information, and this SB 129 committee is really looking forward to collaborating with the executive team as this effort moves forward. The communication plan is exactly where we're at right now. It's really starting the communication to all of our employees and working on a really extensive and redundant communication plan to reach out to all of our groups, all of our employees throughout the agencies and all the stakeholders. That's going to be critical over the next few months that we stay in touch with them and they understand not only the process that we've gone through already, but the process of really, as you see here in the last piece, is we start finalizing our plan and we begin implementation. And that's going to be a critical point in this, but I think we're really looking forward to that point of starting the communication to our employees and then really begin that implementation phase where we could really start seeing the change. So, thank you.
Anyone else? We're good? And again, there's a little bit more detailed information on the money items in your packet. So with that, ends our report. We'll take any questions.
Thank you. So before taking questions, we'll see if we have any members of the public who wish to speak. And we do not.
We do not have any hands raised, Chair.
And colleagues, anyone have any questions? Member Lopez, excuse me.
Just thank you so much for your work. It's incredibly important. I couldn't be more supportive. I have one question on the mental leave days because that's coming out of the grant. What kind of a time frame do we have that budgeted for? And maybe staff can also follow up if there's more information that can be provided.
Sure, we can provide you any detailed information you want about the grant. I can even send the grant documents over to you if you like, but the quick answer is that the grant itself, the period of the grant is until June 30th of 2024, and we have divided that period into 2 sets of months, if you will, and I don't want to say just calendar years because it doesn't really fall that way after we started, so that each employee for about a 12-month period gets 3 days each.
Yeah. All right, so I appreciate that very much, and the reason I ask that is to hopefully tee up, maybe a discussion to come back to us about how to continue to support that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Member Foley?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and updating us monthly on the work you're doing, which is so important to the mental health of the VTA staff and their families. So I actually want to follow up on what Member Lopez had to say, and that is currently their employees are allowed 3 days mental health, no questions asked, but I'd really love to see how we will be able to offer that in the future. Because while it's important today, those people who may be struggling with depression may not realize they're struggling with it yet until the funds go away and their availability to access mental health days or just take time off will be available to them. So I'd love to see how we can pursue that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Foley.
And Member Torres?
No, just thank you for that report, and thank you so much to our bargaining units for organizing and investing in this. It's a tragedy what happened, huge tragedy what happened, but we're all working as an organization to move forward, so thank you.
Ms. Chavez?
Thank you, and it's great to see all of you, not in boxes, but in person. And I do want to just say thank you for the incredible work. I really understand how incredibly hard this has been for you, and appreciate that you're all sticking together and going through this process. I have a broader question that may not be for all of you, but actually, Carolyn, for you, and that is, I am very interested in understanding how the executive staff, you all, are making a determination that something should be spent from these funds versus our general funds. And then it builds really into the points that have been raised by my colleagues about, and therefore what will move forward versus not. And particularly, I want to make sure that we have enough of these funds, that there are enough of these funds that we're not putting work in this money, on this source of funding that really should be part of our base budget. So as part of the budget process, if you could give us feedback on that with the guidelines that are being used, again, by the executive staff to make a determination as to what goes in this pot versus what should be in our base budget.
Yeah, and let me address that a little bit. I think this first year, the focus really has been on getting it up and running. So most of the funds the first year were out of SB 129. They've already started thinking, I will say that, and we are relying on them. We are getting a lot of great, they're working their tails off plus their regular jobs. But, and they're helping us set those recommendations forward, because part of that is part of the organizational culture and climate change work, and what do we want to incorporate into our agency ongoing. So that's going to be some of the work that's going to be coming out of that, and we're already starting to get insights, and we're starting to think about what is going to continue on, or what do we want to do to move on. I mean, there might not be things we need that we're doing now, but might need to be modified in the future. So I agree with that. We are starting to think about that. Some of the things that the CFO, Greg, is looking at is making sure we have budget for some of these activities and where we're going, but it is going to be definitely an iterative process, and we're really relying on this team and the discussions that they'll have with the chiefs to help form what we're going to continue to do and have in our budget to go forward, because we're not going to have anything past this 20 million from the state per se. And there's a lot of activities that should be part of VTA's work.
I guess what I want to make sure that I understand is, from your perspective, under what terms and conditions is money coming out of here today versus our own budget? That's kind of job one. And then the second step is exactly what you just said, which is the work all of you are doing to determine what gets embedded into the organization long-term. And I recognize there are complications to that, right? There's some of it will be bargaining and all of that. But the reason I'm asking that question is I want to make sure that as a board member that I understand that, and that I have a sense of why and what, because it may determine what gets prioritized and what doesn't based on the decisions you all are already making. So that's one issue. And then the other issue is that I think you raise a great point that, and I just really want to, again, thank Senator Cortese for making these resources available. And a bigger question I would have is, both based on your experience, what is it that we want to look at potentially statewide, as an initiative for all transit agencies? And there may be other public sector entities that would fit under this, but you're going to have so much learning that may require some bill opportunities statewide. And, and again, I'll just add one other point, and that is the investment we're making in the Trauma and Recovery Center now. My belief is that the Trauma and Recovery Center needs to really be embedded in our local government for all of our uses, not just for one or the other. But that's another opportunity, again, to build off of something statewide that may be allowing us to fund activities that don't necessarily have to rest on the VTA's budget, but should be part of a statewide analysis. So it's both what we're doing today, how we're making those decisions, how, what's unique about this funding that gives you some flexibility, and then longer term, what are the other partners that should be investing in this? And as an example, on the trauma center, if we're able to get resources at a statewide level, we may also want to ask public sector entities across the county who else wants to invest to have access to that service, year round. And by the way, not just for these incredibly large, horrific incidents, but as you all know, all of us know this, that incidents occur all the time that are re-triggering or that don't necessarily fit into this experience, but could be a hardship at a workplace if not addressed. So all that is to say thank you to you all. I really want to understand the economic framework, and then from you all, your vision and your experience and how that helps us think both locally and nationally, let's just go national, but statewide in terms of what are the next steps. So thank you. Good job.
And I would, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
JP, do you want to speak for? Thank you, Director Chavez. I appreciate all your comments. This doesn't fully answer one of the questions that you were posing, but I just wanted, for the benefit of everyone, the California Workforce Development Board and our grants department made sure we were very aware of this, but they basically said, if you misspend $1 of this grant money, then they have the ability to take back the full 20 million. So the committee as a whole is functioning in a fiduciary fashion, and as Jay alluded to, we're doing our own internal audits. We will make sure that we're not misspending the money. We will make sure that only the items that are listed in the grant the money can be applied to those items. So that's part of our oversight that we're providing. So hopefully that answers part of the question, but there is that longer term question of what lives on beyond the grant.
Well, I think, Mark, the point first of all, thank you for that. And having served on that board, I know exactly how painful they are to deal with at a state level. But what I was really asking is not necessarily what you should be spending on, but what our general fund should be aiding in. And the reason for that is that in some instances where you're up against a wall in terms of trying to make decisions while you're in a learning process, that may or may not be helpful to the long-term goals that we're setting for the organization overall. That's really the issue that I'm trying to address.
Oh, go ahead, JP.
Just quickly, I want to thank the board for being forward-thinking. At the end of the day, these mental health resources that we're using, the need won't go away at the end of this grant. So definitely, we will need funding from whatever resources to continue. Certain levels within, line items within this are definitely going to be needed. So I like some of the people, everybody here sort of being forward-thinking on this. So thank you.
And I would just like to add an additional thank you, because if ever there was a project that is completely reliant on the collaboration of the leadership of our workforce and the grassroots of our workforce, this is it. And as you've heard tonight, the work that you're doing really has the potential to not only address these issues, but to be enduring and to even be leveraged and have impacts beyond our organization. And I think you should be really proud of what you're doing. Yeah. Thank you.
If I may add something to that, some of us are almost at the end of our journey here at VTA. She's not. Me speaking. But you are absolutely right. We're taking this on because we would like to leave a better place for the rest of the employees. And we take pride in that, and we take it very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, so we'll now move on to our item 7.3, which is the VTA BART Silicon Valley Phase 2 update. And we'll receive an update from Gary Griggs, our Chief BART Silicon Valley Program Officer, and Bernice Alanis, Director of SVRT Business Operations, who will provide, I guess, is Bernice here too? Is she? Great.
Bernice is joining us remotely, Chair.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome, Gary.
Chair Burt, can you hear me? Can't tell. There we go. Chair Burt, Vice Chair Chavez, Directors, and General Manager Ganot. My name is Gary Griggs, Program Officer for the BART Silicon Valley Phase 2 Extension Project. Pleased to give you another update on the status of the project. Next slide, please. We've made some major progress and had achieved some significant deliverables here in the last week or two. In particular, the large contract, the contract package 2, which our contractor Kiewit Shea Trailer is undertaking the tunneling and the track work portion of the project. They just completed what we call programming services phase. There we go. The programming services phase of the project, which results in what we call the configuration design. So this is the first major deliverable that we're actually seeing the drawings and laying out the details of the project. In particular, they're incorporating the innovations that we've been discussing over the last year that have been brought forward. One of the major innovations as shown in this graphic is the ability to enlarge the tunnel a bit to allow us to go to the side-by-side trackway in the center platform. Very significant improvement in the project. The next phase of the project, and we've just issued a notice to proceed to the contractor team, is to undertake what we call the design professional services. So they'll be advancing the design now forward. And this contract is really driving the whole program. It's a major portion of the project around which everything else will be coordinating. As I've been discussing with you in previous board meetings, we are in the procurement phase of the tunnel boring machine. That's a very significant item to be brought on board, which will be undertaking the 5 miles of underground tunneling. And part of that is what we call a space-proofing report. And that's a report that we do to make sure that we can accommodate all the facilities within this tunnel in order to meet the requirements of the project. The KST team, the Kiewit Shea Trailer team, are advancing designs. In last December, you'll remember I came before you to ask to proceed with the TBM procurement and also what we call early works. So we'll be doing that. Early works, one of the items will be preparing the U-Haul yard for launch of the TBM machine. And we'll be seeing some other works coming up over the course of the year. Next slide, please. This is a program timeline that I present to you often, going back to May of 2022 when we awarded the contract to the Kiewit Shea Trailer joint venture to undertake the tunneling and track work. We're now, and then in December, as I mentioned earlier, we did get approval to proceed in procurement of the tunnel boring machine and undertake some of the early work packages. We will be coming back to you in the summer to bring forward some additional early work packages. As we proceed to the major event, which will be in 2024, we'll be able to release the contractor to undertake the tunneling. It takes about 14 months for us to procure the tunnel boring machine. It'll be coming from overseas, so it'll need to be shipped over here and assembled. So we have quite a lot of time there in order to progress the design and prepare for the actual tunneling work. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you a broader update over and above the current contract that's underway. So we are, with our own design resources, the general engineering consultant in particular, advancing design on the other elements of the project. And one of the key elements of that is to provide the interface information that's required for the big tunneling and track work contract. We also have ongoing coordination with BART and on design development and submittal reviews. They will be our operator and maintainer and very critical in how we design the system. We also are finalizing what we're calling the contract packaging and project delivery report. And this is where we looked at how we want to deliver the other elements of the project, in particular the systems components of the project, the yard facility and maintenance facilities, and also the stations. And so we'll be coming forward to you to present our findings of that in the way that we can best deliver this project by the delivery systems that we'll be presenting to you. And then we're currently getting ready to release an RFP, more than likely this month, a request for proposal that will bring in a construction management services firm to help oversee the construction as we move forward with the project. Next slide, please. Wanted to give an update on the Federal Transit Administration. I had a little bit of discussion that earlier with our lobbyists that are helping us in Washington, D.C. We are continuing to work very closely with the VTA, and we're developing what's called a roadmap, and that's going to show how we proceed through the course of time over the course of the project to accrue the funding and the major funding that the VTA will be bringing to the project. We have ongoing meetings with components of the VTA, in particular headquarters and also here in the region, and with the Federal Transit Administration's program management oversight contractor. We will be this summer hitting another major milestone and requesting entry into New Starts Engineering. As you know, last December we were brought back into the New Starts program, which increased the amount of funding that we can get from the Federal Transit Administration. And then we're also headed again towards 2024 to get our full funding grant agreement, very critical point in the project, to secure the funding that we need to proceed with the major construction on the project. Next slide, please. I think this is where we're going to try to go hybrid and bring our External Affairs Manager, Bernice Alaniz, in. So hopefully she can join us.
Hi, good evening, board members and those attending the meeting. Just wanted to provide some follow-up from our February board meeting where there was a request that we reach out and present the station refinement updates to both the VTA Committee for Transit Accessibility and Mobility and to the BART Accessibility Task Force. So wanted to share when we've scheduled those presentations. So next week I'll be going to the VTA Committee for Transportation, Mobility, and Accessibility. We are doing a presentation, general update of the BART Phase 2 project, as well as some aspects of the Santa Clara Station regarding some of the station aesthetics and refinements, as well as the configuration of the roadway in front of the station, and that will be March 21st. We're presenting an update to the San Jose City Council on May 9th. And then the two task force for BART, the Accessibility Task Force and their BART Bicycle Advisory Task Force in May and June. And we can go to the next slide. As we begin to prepare for the early construction works, we are going to be sharing information on our draft construction transportation management plan. And we have 2 meetings scheduled. We have an in-person public meeting at Santa Clara University on March 15th in the evening. And then we also have an opportunity for an online public meeting the following day. This is where we will go over the means and methods identified by the CP2 contractor for the early works. That's mainly a lot of the preparation at the Newhall Yard site. And we will be sharing what the plan is and how we'll deliver that, the truck hauling and other things. So just wanted to let you know, this is our first major public meeting that we've had since the pandemic. And happy to answer any questions should you have them.
Okay, thank you, Bernice, and that completes our presentation, and we welcome any questions.
Thank you. So first, let's hear from, see if we have any members of the public, which we do not. Colleagues? Any questions? Member Jane.
Yeah, as you well know, I've been concerned about the design and flow of people in the Santa Clara station, and there's supposed to be an ad hoc station design committee. Can you give me some idea of when that should start? And then, of course, we raised the question last time about the dirt from the tunnel.
Yes, Director Jane, thank you. Yes, we are proceeding with work on the Santa Clara Station. We're in fact planning to come forward to you to present the findings of that. We're engaging the new committee as well. Haven't set out the details of how we're going to proceed there, but we are coming before you fairly soon to discuss the various aspects of the station that we've been reviewing with you for some time. In regards to the excavated materials, we have a very strong program coming forward that we're going to also be presenting to you. And really, I'm very pleased the way it's going because it's meeting all of the high standards we want in terms of environmental sensitivity and sustainability. So I think you'll be very pleased with that. I know that you're also looking maybe for opportunities for others in the vicinity to maybe take advantage of some of those excavated materials. We want to bring that forward to you as well.
And those would be in this March 15th and 21st meetings?
I don't remember the
meetings?
exact date. We're meeting with the Santa Clara City staff. I don't remember the exact date. Oh, yeah, there it is. Santa Clara City Council, March 21st, 2023.
Right, but there's also the Santa Clara University meeting on March 15th.
Yes, there'll be 2 meetings there. One will be in person on the 15th and one virtual on the 16th.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Member Torres.
No, just thank you so much for that presentation. As the downtown council member, I have a lot of nervous small businesses, so just want to reiterate how important it is that we do this right, because they are knocking on my door still and will continue to be knocking on my door, because there's small businesses that were displaced in the late 80s when light rail came into downtown, and so now their business is now on East Santa Clara Street, and now they're going to fear being displaced yet again, and so we just have to make sure that we're doing this right. So thank you.
Yes, Director Torres, we're very sensitive to that. One of the benefits we have here is we are using the single bore. And so you'll see a lot less disruption than you've ever experienced before in terms of transit projects, including the light rail. And there will be some disruption off street where we're putting the stations, especially the downtown San Jose station. But I'll tell you, my experience has actually been that I think it will generate business for small business, because you're going to see crews working down there looking to get meals and other things that I think you'll actually see some stimulation of small business in the downtown area.
I continue to say we have to do this right. Community outreach is extremely important, and I know that we're all going to work together to make sure that our businesses, Spanish, Filipino, Vietnamese, everybody gets it in the flyer in whatever language they use. So I know we're going to do that, but I know that, you know, we have a lot of nervous people, especially a lot of nervous residents as well, especially a lot of parishioners from Five Wounds Church. So.
Yes, thank you, Director Torres, and we'll continue to get out in community meetings to keep people informed of what our plans are.
Vice Chair Chavez.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a recommendation that at the full board at some future meeting that we actually just lay out not just the outreach plan, but the business mitigation strategy that's going to be used, and I think that's just really important. I think both. Yeah, and the whole board should understand what that is.
Yes.
And frankly, we should understand what that is before we get too far into the fall.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Vice Chair Chavez.
And I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Chair Sullivan, I just wanted to say that that's one of the items that we'll be bringing soon to the board is the draft small business resource plan.
Bernice, I'm sorry, you freaked me out. I didn't see you. I just heard a voice, and it took me a minute to focus on you. So I heard but I think could you just say what you said again, the last sentence?
So we are going to be presenting to the board, I believe, in the May timeframe, the draft small business resource plan. And
Perfect.
that is how we're going to work with the small businesses in the program that includes marketing, technical assistance, and other aspects to support businesses during construction.
Perfect. And the only thing I'm going to say is that we have a pattern, not just us, all of our agencies, when we're doing something, whether it's bus rapid transit or whatever, where we start with technical assistance and then we end with some sort of a subsidy strategy. I just want to say, let's do it all in one fell swoop. Let's not do it in pieces. Let's know that it's going to be a long time. Let's know that we're going to cause some strain and stress, and that the plan be replete with all aspects of what you're going to be recommending, and that we don't do that in phases. And my only point is that with bus rapid transit, we had the same discussion, and we said, oh, we're going to help them with marketing and signage, and it really wasn't enough. We knew it wouldn't be enough, and then we ended up doing it on the back end, which just created such a level of resentment. It was completely unnecessary. So I'd like to skip to the end. All right, thank you.
Yeah, we do have a component in there that does include criteria for a business interruption fund type of program.
Forward to learning more.
Well, I'll just add, as big as this is and as complicated as it is, we have on the horizon the need to tackle the Diridon design, and so I don't know, I know there are a lot of discussions about a potential JPB, and so my question is, this both for staff and the board, is how do we move forward on that process, because the clock's ticking? Anybody? Member Davis.
I just nominated Deb.
It was either Cindy or I who were going to answer this question, since we were in multiple meetings about it today, including the mayor. So the Diridon Joint Policy Advisory Board is overseeing that process for now, but the consultant, Jim, do you want to weigh in?
Oh, you're doing fine.
So, thanks. So there's a consultant who's working on overarching the business case, which includes the governance process for that. There are also, the city of San Jose has a full-time person just on DISC, and which is Diridon Integrated Station Concept for those of you who haven't been steeped in this for the last 4 years. And Caltrain also has a full-time person working on this. So we will have more to bring to the board, I hope, after our first meeting of 2023, which is in April.
I would just add that at the next Diridon Station Joint Policy Advisory Committee, we'll start to begin that process by making sure that the committee is up to speed on what the ramifications and decisions you need to make about creating a JP, a true Joint Powers Authority are, as well as looking at, is that in fact the best methodology, or are there other potential methods of providing the governance and direction that would be necessary? So it's underway. There's a lot of work to do, and we're ready to do it.
One thing that that Carolyn was just reminding me is that that VTA had been taking a look at this too, and this actually goes to the point of how we do a good job of really coordinating all of our partners and recognizing that each entity is going to have a different set of needs and priorities, and we're going to have to figure out how to blend them. And I just will say one point that may seem somewhat frivolous, but I don't think it really is, and that is that my one experience, well, there were many, but as it relates to Caltrain governance was, and it's still true with MTC, is that the way those entities were designed didn't take into account the long-term nature of the relationships that we were going to need to have and the challenges relative to sharing resources and all of that. And so one goal I have is that whatever structure gets put in place, it's one that we think will do a better job of uniting us with our other partners, and that we do that as a board, that we really think about a couple things that have been hard for me to get my arms around, which is, you know, Caltrain is us, like we're a third of it. Actually, we're more than a third. And so how do we not negotiate against ourselves? How is it that we're really using this opportunity to pull our teams together? And so I just want to appreciate Deb, because she really has thought about this more than most should have to. Maybe that's the best way to say it.
And you both lived through the Caltrain governance discussions.
We're still living through it, but yeah. But anyway, so I think that'll be great to get that report that that VTA is working on, because I do think it gives a perspective that really hones in on what our needs are.
What do we need to do?
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that concludes this item. Okay, so we can now go on to other items. So this 8.1 is whether there are any items of concern for referral to the administration by members, other than Diridon. Member Dean.
Thank you, and I'll just be really brief, and I wanted to just make a quick comment that a lot of my constituents have raised to me about a non-agenda item. So if it's not really any action item, nor am I trying to put one on the agenda, but if you feel I'm brushing against the confines of the Brown Act, I encourage you or the General Counsel to just let me know and cut me off. But the district which I represent on my city council is in North Sunnyvale, and many of our students, and for those of you who don't know, historically, North Sunnyvale, compared to the rest of the city, is more underdeveloped, underrepresented, and has less resources given to it. And so many of our students rely on public transportation to get to school. There is one route currently, one bus route, 55, that services it. But outside of that, our students have no other means really of getting that transportation that they need. And so as we've seen, many of those students are either regularly late for class or otherwise unable to access the educational resources that they need. And so this has been a really big equity issue that we're trying to address in my city, the city of Sunnyvale, but I wanted to just bring it up to the board today, just as a comment, because I think it's important for the rest of my colleagues to know about this and keep it in mind. Thank you.
Carolyn?
Yeah, I mean, I think tomorrow we'll be having, at the board workshop, we'll be talking about a lot about service planning. So that's a good point. But then, of course, they won't have the answers, but we will have our service planning manager talk to you about
I
that.
appreciate it. I remember when we were doing the staff briefings earlier this week, they mentioned it as well, so I look forward to that.
Anyone else? Member Jane.
Unlike many of my colleagues, I don't have any staff. So, you know.
Neither do I.
So I noticed that in this agenda, there were an unusual number of late-minute add-on items. Is there any way we can get those earlier, just a couple days earlier, so that I can get through them?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't like them too.
I know, anybody, Elaine gives them
The GOCC, right? Yeah.
Right, and any other announcements? Okay. And so there are no closed session items tonight, so I just want to remind everybody that we have our board workshop back here. We'll see everybody, hopefully.
in 5 minutes.
Yeah, at 9 o'clock in the morning. It will be back here at River Oaks in this same conference room. And our regular meeting is now adjourned.